while we're on.
Hey, now, what's the big deal? I can't see the difference between that and this anyway.
You don't see the difference? The difference is that I grew it. That's what the difference is. That I picked it and I fixed it. And it has a taste and it has some color. And it has a smell. And that it calls back a time when there were flowers all over the earth. And there were valleys. And there were plains of tall green grass that you could lie down in, that you could go to sleep in. And there were blue skies, and there was fresh air, and there were things growing all over the place, not just in some domed enclosures blasted some millions of miles out into space. Look at that stuff. How can you guys sit there and really say anything to me about this? Look at this crap. Look at that. Dried synthetic crap. And you've become so dependent on it that I bet you can't even live without it.
What do we want to, Lo?
Don't you realize how pitiful that is, what you just asked me? On Earth, everywhere you go, the temperature is 75 degrees. Everything is the same. All the people are exactly the same. Now, what kind of life is that?
Well, if it's so rotten, why do you want to go back?
Because it's not too late to change it.
What do you want, Lo? I mean, there's hardly any more disease, there's no more poverty. Nobody's out of a job.
That's right. Every time we have the argument, you say the same thing to me. You give me the same three answers all the time. The same thing, well, everybody has a job. That's always the last one. But you know what else there is no more of, my friend? There is no more beauty. And there's no more imagination. And there are no frontiers left to conquer. And you know why? Only one reason why. One reason why. The same attitude that you three guys are giving me right here in this room today. And that is, nobody cares.
Accessing historical database. Year 2020. The tech giants become aware of the greatest threat to their corporatist domination. An obscure science and tech podcast becomes a major factor in a peaceful open source revolt against the military Silicon Valley industrial complex. The podcast, Sovryn Tech. Its host, Dr. Brian Sovryn. The tech giants tried to stop Sovryn Tech. They can't.
Woo! You are getting the absolute best in professional podcasting, baby. And that means you are being joined by the Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Sabzu, the rated R radio star. But I, as I love to get to say, am not alone. I am being joined by none other than the real-life Tomb Raider. The amazing, the brilliant, the beautiful Ellen Sovryn.
That's right.
Yeah. When were you on last? A month? Two months ago?
Been a month at least, yeah.
Our schedules are nuts.
Right.
I mean, you finally had a little bit of a break over Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving vacation, yeah. It's been wonderful.
But now, so you were going to university, I don't know, what, 2-3 days a week?
Right.
For a little while now. And you're finishing up. I mean, you're finishing up. This, we're, giving people a little bit of an update. But interestingly, so the university you're going to here in New Hampshire, they are closed now for or not closed, but you will not be going to university. Like you're going to do everything remotely now. Have I got that right?
Right. Essentially, all non-essential personnel are going to be doing things remotely. So yeah, I'm not going to be traveling at all. I'll be home.
I think you're essential, damn it.
Thank you. I'm just one of the student populace, though. So yeah, we're all being sent home for the remainder of the semester, which is only about 4 or 5 weeks. So that's not bad.
Yeah.
Then I'll literally be finished. Done.
Frankly, I think you're getting out right on time.
I would have preferred to have gotten out sooner, but yeah. I've seen enough chaos and I'm ready to go.
Do you think, let me ask you this. So you're getting, your degree is going to be in...
So I'm going to have a bachelor's of science in chemical engineering with a bioengineering option.
Right. Okay. I forget where I've heard these kinds of terms. Some of them I do know where I've heard them. But do you think that people are going to call... For you, I don't think it's going to be the case because you've only had to deal with this for about a half year or basically a semester. But do you think there's going to be a term going around called COVID degrees?
I've heard other students say this and make jokes about it.
Okay.
Possibly. I think for people who are maybe freshmen or sophomore now, who are just starting to get into the real core of their education.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's going to be, this maybe this sort of like predisposition within like the realm of employers and whatnot that are hiring these people that graduate within the next year or two. Saying something like, "Oh, these people have the COVID degrees, so they haven't gone through the rigorous study that other students might have." Because for people who are in the science fields who need to use the laboratories that are on campus,
right,
to do research or even for their regular everyday classwork, they're not going to get that experience. And since I've experienced that, I know how integral those can be to what they're trying to teach you. I mean, you really don't get the same experience.
It's not hands-on.
No, you don't get the same knowledge and expertise if you're just learning this from reading about it.
Yeah, I think we might have talked about this a little bit in previous episodes that you were on. I remember last semester, basically your professor had to run all the labs for you, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
You
actually,
talked about it over Zoom.
There were a couple classes where that happened, where I would either watch the professor perform an experiment in the lab, or they would just send me the data and I'd have to write reports on it.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, I think it just bolsters. I think you're getting out right on time.
Oh, definitely. I would not want to go through this for another semester. I mean, especially considering while I was doing the in-person classes, everybody had to turn in these nasal COVID tests twice a week.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember you were going in even on days that you normally didn't go to university. You were taking in the test.
Right.
Yeah,
and that was just an additional drive. It was kind of annoying, but
sure.
On the one hand, it was kind of neat, and I appreciated the experience. And also, if you got it or if I got it, we would know within a few days.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in a weird way, you're getting tested was almost like me getting tested.
Exactly.
Because 99% of the time, I mean, we're just all over each other. There's no way one of us isn't getting what the other's got.
Well, we're within 6 feet of each other at all times.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, at least when we're sitting at our desk, we're within 6 feet of each other.
That's true. But I mean, that's, a whole other story when, the horizontal polka or anything else is going on. But
the hunka chunka?
The hunka chunka, the wild mambo. That's pretty good to do a little Demolition Man reference there for you. Of course, if you listened recently, I did an episode where I reviewed the Amazon Halo band, and you get to hear all about that, and I referenced Demolition Man once again over and over. So anyway, get a chance to plug that little episode if nobody caught that bonus. Well worth listening. You had to put up with me wearing that Amazon Halo band. And dealing with me in real time wearing this damn thing.
Boy, did I.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. How about you? Let me ask you this. I mean, we've got some tech stories to get into. We've got a great, actually, really, and we didn't plan on this necessarily, but it almost feels like synchronicity going on. There's a lot of stories that coalesced and came together and are going to create an overarching theme throughout this entire episode that we're going to do, Ellen. But I mean, how do you feel about, because this will play into our one little story for the foreplay. How do you feel about, these fitness trackers? Did you ever wear one? Did you ever deal with these things?
Admittedly, I've never worn a fitness tracker.
Uh-huh.
And part of the reason is that I have kind of always known what level of physical activity I need to do in order for me to feel physically fit.
Sure.
And that's just because over the years I've practiced and trained, and I know what my body needs, and I know what I need to do in order to feel healthy and in shape. And I've just never seen the benefit of having a fitness tracker. I mean, I never did the sort of exercise that just involves a number of steps or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, you did run cross country.
Yes,
I mean, you're a fit individual. I mean, just straight up.
You.
Yeah. You have been.
Ever since I was like 12 or 13 years old, I've been running cross country, which was like 5 miles a day or 3 miles a day, depending on the day. I just carried on that practice throughout my life, even after I graduated high school, even after I moved to New Hampshire, all the way up until pretty much like 2 years ago, you and I started weightlifting together.
Right.
But yeah, I've always been a fit person, and I'm very aware of my body and what state or what level of fitness I'm at. So, I just never felt the need for a fitness tracker.
Sure.
And besides that, like, I would track my fitness the old-fashioned way. Like, I used to keep journals where I'd write down, like, how far I ran and how long it took. So, yeah, I guess I just prefer the low-tech method of tracking fitness as opposed to, like, using a wristband or something.
Yeah, or, well, what I would say is really the best way, much like you're saying, just listen to your body. And yes, it takes time to learn to listen to your body, but do it. And I know it's twice as hard today because we're constantly distracted either by a fitness tracker itself or by that other tracking device. What do they call them? Smartphones that are consistently distracting us. But yeah, okay. Well, that's good to know. I mean, certainly I know you've heard me say these sorts of things as well.
Sure. I just feel like that's not data that I need to keep on an electronic device. And also, if I can do it the low-tech way, why do I need to spend money on a fitness tracker?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And another thing, this is just personal preference. I don't really like wearing jewelry and stuff. I mean, I do occasionally, but I wouldn't want to wear something around my wrist every day, all the time.
Right.
To me, that just seems annoying, but I know not everyone's like that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, why don't we go ahead and we're going to get into, I know a lot of people love when we do a little Sovereign Tech book club, and it's something I generally only do when you're on. And we talk about what we've been reading lately. But before we get into that, and this is, so, I mean, part of the reason I wanted to ask you about the fitness tracker is because now, obviously you're brilliant.
Obviously.
Well, I think it's obvious. and plenty of Sovereign Tech listeners have shared their opinions as well. Obviously you're brilliant, but when it comes to tech, or when it comes to like a lot of more consumer technologies or a lot of these other things, it's not, you don't have this deep passion where you need to use the latest gizmo or gadget.
Oh, no, not
right.
at all.
That's my point. And so asking you about a fitness tracker is far different than, or, your opinion about them is it's not different, but it's getting a possible different perspective, because I have been historically the kind of person who's always about, give me the latest update, give me the latest gadget, blah, 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 blah. I'm not the latest gadget kind of guy anymore. Now I'm more about, no, give me the tried and true device, whatever that happens to be. But that's why I like to get your perspective on things. And so I want to open up here, even though we've already opened up, but I want to open up with a story that when this hit, now I shared it on Twitter and said, wow, this is the right move. Normally, I don't give a company like Google the time of day or credit, to say, wow, that's the right moves. But I think they did something that is I have questions and I might have a critique or two, but I think it's worthwhile to bring up and talk about. And I really do want your perspective, Ellen, because again, you're not the one who wants to try 20 million apps. And so I don't want to call it, I would never insult you by calling you normal. Just that you might have more of the layman's perspective, I guess, on this side of things.
Sure, if you mean I'm not a tech journalist.
Yeah, right. Yeah, sure. Exactly. And it's good because me, as a tech journalist, I can get stuck in my own ass. And, you're right there with your, in fact, very impressive triceps, ready to just pull my ass or pull my head right out of my ass. So I appreciate that. Yeah. But anyway, let's talk about it. So a couple of years ago, Google implemented into Android Messages, which is the SMS app for, basically it's the text messaging app for all Android devices, or it did become the standard anyway. There was a time where actually, there were a bunch of different text messaging apps, but then Google basically standardized it and people ran with it. They also standardized a new protocol called bleh. We just got done eating, folks, and watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, which, by the way, later on, have you been on since we finished Babylon 5?
I don't think so.
We got to have a little bit of a conversation about that.
We will.
We got to. Okay. All right. We got some other reviews we're going to get into, but anyway, we'll save it. So anyway, what they called RCS, which is a protocol somewhat separate from SMS. And I think it just means rich chat services or something like that. But basically, it was trying to add to SMS or to SMS clients the ability to do read receipts, typing notifications, all kinds of different things. And overall, it's a fine thing because SMS, while it is a standard, and there's a reason it's still heavily used throughout the planet, it's okay to let's evolve this a little bit. And they have been working on that. They started it about 2 years ago. Earlier, I think it was this year, they basically forced all Android Messages apps, which is, again, it's just the app that's called Messages, to start using RCS, because the telcos were taking too long. Verizon was taking too long implementing it. Nobody else is implementing it. So Google just said, well, we're just going to turn it on and we control the operating system. So fuck you, which, good.
They can.
Yeah, right. I mean, anything that really fucks with the telcos, I'm kind of on board with, even though I would say Google is at parity as far as, maliciousness. But regardless, they did this, and it was back in May, I think, of this year, where there were some hints in a recent APK, the code basically for Messages, where it had suggested that they were going to start implementing end-to-end encryption. Well, come this time, of 2020, we're in the end of November here of 2020, Google has confirmed that, yes, we are going to put end-to-end encryption in Android Messages, so basically your text messages from here on out, it's going to be a slow rollout. It's only available in beta right now, but they will be end-to-end encrypted. Not only that, it's end-to-end encryption being done using the Signal protocol, which is fine. Have arguments all you want around phone numbers getting used, and we need to talk about that, but have arguments all you want around any issues with some app choices, perhaps, that Signal has made in the past year. And I understand where people are coming from when they have concerns around that. But the Signal protocol itself is pretty solid encryption math. And so it's a good choice to use. And not that Google's, not used to it. They used it with Allo as well, one of their previous, messaging apps. So now they made it clear that this doesn't work with group messaging. So it only works when you're using it one-to-one. But I'll say at first blush, this is fantastic. This is great because this is an app that comes stock with every Android smartphone that you buy. And for it to automatically have, gold standard encryption baked in and on, and it should be on by default, I assume it's going to be, we'll see, is just a win for everybody. That fucks with the telcos. It's really, I think, a fantastic thing. Now, I have a couple of possible critiques around this, but I want to ask you on this, Ellen. So we normally use Signal years ago. We used to use Signal quite a bit. Then we switched over to Telegram, and we use that. How do you feel about this announcement? How do you feel are you going to use text messaging more? Are you more inclined to use it now that it's going to be end-to-end encrypted? Give me some thoughts on this.
So my first thought is, it's great that they're finally using that encryption, the Signal's encryption. From what I understand, it only works if both parties have the
Android Messages.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to bring up quick, that's a lot of people are criticizing Apple because now Apple does this with iMessages, which is their version, or iMessage, which is their version of SMS and messages and everything. But Apple, they could play ball with this and make iMessage interact with RCS as a universal standard, and they're not. And that's kind of bullshit. People are rightly calling them out about it. But anyway, please continue. Yeah, so both sides have to have it.
Yeah, and also it's interesting that Google says that they're willing to work with any other company if they want to start implementing this or whatever. And to me, that kind of sounds like they're scared of being chased for antitrust laws or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Which, that's fine, too. I mean, it's great that they're welcoming some sort of, cooperative working with other companies.
Sure. I mean, I would love it. And I'll tell you, here's a real possible game changer is that if your dumb phones, your burner phones that aren't Android or iOS, if those start to use RCS as a standard and they have the end-to-end encryption turned on, I mean, fuck, if a dumb phone becomes basically enabled with Signal, that makes the dumb phone all the more attractive again.
Sure.
Absolutely. But continue, please.
So anyway, as far as will this make me use SMS more often than I already do? Mm-hmm. And the answer is simply no, because not that I don't trust the encryption. Mm-hmm. Of course I do. I mean, I've used Signal plenty of times. It's just that I only speak to certain people through SMS.
Yeah.
And those conversations are not particularly sensitive.
Right.
Those kind of conversations I do use like Telegram or Signal with or for. And that's just because I trust them.
Sure, right.
So maybe, over time, if it is proven that the encryption on SMS text is really solid and there's no, I don't know, nothing nefarious on Google's part, then, maybe I would stop being so concerned and use SMS more often. But it's not really something that I need because I'm one of those people that has a bunch of different chat and text message apps on my phone.
Right.
Just because everybody seems to use something different.
Yeah. So I think this is, let's talk about this a little bit. I mean, one of the major disadvantages here, say over even Signal or Telegram, is that this does not do encryption over group messages, at least not yet. Mm-hmm. And that does not make it a replacement for Signal, Telegram, Threema, go down the list of them. Okay. I do have... One of the issues that a lot of people bring up with Signal is that they don't like that. I mean, just to talk about some of my concerns with this, even though I think it's ultimately a good thing. I mean, because one quick aspect that's a good thing is this is one less app that people have to install. If we could get to a future, perhaps, where you don't have to install any other messaging apps because the encryption and everything and the experience is so well done with Android messages. Hey, okay. I could see that as a win. However, one of the critiques that has constantly been made against, and really Telegram needs this too, but that has been particularly made against Signal, is that you need to have the other person's phone number. This, I think, can be, with Signal, it's a real issue. With Telegram, not so much. You do need a phone number for Telegram to verify the account, but not to communicate with other people. As to where with Signal, you do. With Telegram, you can change your phone number at any time and keep the same account. That's not exactly possible with Signal, even though I think they're trying to go that distance, to go that direction. But then I think you lose the specialness of what Signal is when you do that. The fact that it is something where all of your client-side information just instantly disappears. I think that's a good thing. That's like one of the purposes for still using Signal is that that's how it can work, that there are effectively no backups. It is not going to some server somewhere or anything like that. There is no file to crack. But regardless, I feel like, we are as a society, and I want to use that term particularly, not as a species, but as a society. As a society, we're very comfortable. We don't really know what it's like to have our lives really upended. I mean, we can have sad things happen, people die, stuff like this. I mean, that's really traumatic and horrible. I'm not going to say anything different, but we don't know what it's like to suddenly have to be on the run A lot of us don't know what it's like to, you might be a target, like as in a target where someone is coming after you to harm you or kill you or something like that. I mean, there's some of us that have to deal with that. People go into witness protection, things like this. My point being is that in the world that we live in as it is today, which is not exactly conducive to human growth.
If it were, whistleblowers wouldn't have to run away.
Right. I think you can see where I'm going with this, is that your phone number, like as great as this is not what would become my de facto, my stock way of communicating with people, because I would never rely on my phone number to be the way that other people get in touch with me on matters that would even necessarily require end-to-end encryption. I mean, end-to-end encryption should be the standard anyway, but my point being is that you never know when, you know what, you might have to change your phone number tomorrow for whatever terrible reason, or even if it's just on a whim.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. And so to have all of that, I mean, I guess there's an argument to be made where, because, and these are where a lot of questions come in. Why is Google doing this? Okay. Also, if you're a Google One subscriber, Google will back up to your Google Drive. They will back up all of your SMS messages. Is it backing up an encrypted store of what you have client side? What does that look like? Why is Google doing this in the first place? In my opinion, they are losing a lot of data and metadata to other companies that run messaging clients, and they just can't have that. And so even though they're not going to make a dime off of advertising with this, they can't let other companies get this data that comes from, messaging apps. And so they're going with a scorched earth policy. They're like, fine, we'll just, we'll make your messaging apps effectively pointless. Now, they haven't for people with the right mindset, but for the everyday person, yeah, I think that's effectively what they're going to do. And again, having that end-to-end encryption, I applaud overall. The other part here is that, and this is similar to what they did with Allo, they want Google Assistant integration. And so even though it's going to be end-to-end encrypted, I still think that there's a lot of interaction, a lot of data that Google's going to be able to collect if people start using Android messages more. And they've had to seen Signal growing in use, Telegram growing in use, and they cannot allow other companies to sweep up all that data from them. So anyway, as good as this is, for me, it also could never become a standard, because again, you never know when just one day your phone number's got to change and all of that goes away, and if it is going to send a backup to Google Drive, and then that way it's like it's attached to my Google email address, my Gmail address, instead of just my phone number, I'm not comfortable with that. Like that I don't feel good about that part. So yeah, this is a good thing ultimately, and they're doing it right. But well, tell me how you feel about this, Ellen. When you're an individualist, okay, and when you don't trust governments.
When I am.
And you are.
Yes, okay.
Do you feel, I feel you should live your life like a spy. Because effectively, if you're not yay team of whoever claims to be running the show, i.e. the government, not that you have to be violent by any means, and of course I know you wouldn't, nor would I. But I mean, I think you should have like the mindset of a spy, because, if you're not paying fealty to the state, in many ways, you're kind of an enemy to it. And that by definition makes you a spy. Even if you're not for another country, you're a spy for yourself, for the individual that you are.
Oh, you're gathering intel for your own use.
Sure. Or, you're doing what you can to, protect yourself from, say, the enemy occupancy or the occupancy around you. So, that's the way I often think about it. And I go through life more or less accordingly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Being an individualist and somebody who does not support the government, mm-hmm. I try to live my life as much as possible outside of the power structure, mm-hmm. And use whatever tools are available in order to do that.
Right.
And any time that I'm unable to escape it, that doesn't feel very good. So I agree, like, live your life as much as possible outside of the control of the government or corporations or whatever organization is trying to gather your data and feed you information based on the metadata that it's gathered. And, just like trying to stay outside of the system and not turn into either like a product yourself.
Right.
Or somebody to be used and controlled.
Yeah, this is why, we have a sovereign tech axiom, which is any and all data that you produce can and will be used against you. And that comes from this mindset of, I think you're effectively a spy. Actually, hell, right now we're in the United States, we're in a country, this is so funny because I've said this for years, quoting like the works of Gene Sharp, and some others, that the idea that just because an organization claims to be the dominant force within a geographic area does not mean that they are actually like the governing force in your life. Mm-hmm. Right now, America's dealing with that because you got a guy who just won't play musical chairs like he's supposed to and get out of the chair when the music stopped playing for him. Right. And you have, Biden, who claims to be the president, and there's, I don't know, whatever percentage of the amount of the country says that he's president. There's a whole other very real people who claim, no, he's not president. The other guy is. Mm-hmm. And so you actually live in a geographic territory right now, even though I know Biden doesn't get sworn in until January, he's president-elect. You're in a territory right now that considers that up to debate. You live in a country that is basically operating under two governments. You live in a geographic location that is operating under two governments. People have told me for years that that's not possible. No, you're living in it right now, motherfucker. But again, people just don't have the mindset. They don't understand that that's how this works. Thing is that if you choose to follow none of these asshats, as you should, who are you working for? Well, you're working for you. And again, it comes back to that. Basically, you're your own James Bond. You're your own spy for yourself. And, if you have any country, maybe it's your computer in our interconnected world. But
and you have to find ways to outsmart the establishment.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And go undercover. And, if you're like living some kind of double life, well, we've got movies for you that you can watch and learn how to do that. But anyway, So coming from a more layman's position, this Google's, while I think you would agree also that it's the right way to do it.
It's a positive change.
Yeah, right. More encryption is always a positive change.
Yes.
But Android messages is not going to increase in use for you.
Not for me, no. But, I could see there would be times possibly where I'd feel more comfortable using SMS than I have been in the past. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's a whole other slew of conversations. Again, how does it interact with iPhone? These are a whole other things that are worth exploring. But from the more tech journalist and gizmo head aspect, I'm with you. I'm not going to end up using this more by any means. I might feel a little more comfortable using it, but it's not going to entice me to use it as like my daily driver.
Yeah, no.
Right. Fair enough. So, all right. We got that out of the way. We're living our lives like spies. And I have to say, you are the sexiest double agent I've ever seen. And no.
Oh, Agent Sovryn.
Woo! Dr. Goldblass. Excuse me.
Flatterer.
You got to make it in this world somehow. No, I'm kidding.
You are a sovereign agent.
Well, speaking of Sovryn, why don't we get into the Sovryn Tech Book Club as we do, as is our tradition. Do you want to open this up or do you want me to?
I guess I'll open it up.
Okay. All right. If you want to, well, let me see here. So, cause I think I know what book you're going to talk about. Let's have you open this baby up and then, because mine will actually play off of what you are talking about. So go for it. What have you been reading lately?
So last time I was on, I was reading a book called Women Don't Ask.
Oh, yeah.
Linda Babcock.
Yep.
And I finished that recently. I had got some really great takeaways from it. Some things that genuinely I feel like benefited me in a real way, or at least they will in the future as long as I can implement them properly. And it was also kind of inspirational to find out that the world is starting to recognize more and more that the way that women negotiate is far more equitable and fair and inclusive than the way that men have traditionally negotiated.
Right.
And, it's just fascinating learning about like the fixed pie fallacy.
Explain this to me.
Which is this idea, traditionally in like male-led negotiating, there's this idea that I'm going into a negotiation, and if I don't get what I want, then, the majority of the pie is going to the other person. So I need to get my share of the pie. And that's all it will ever be, is either I get the most of the pie or you get the most of the pie.
So this is the concept of the zero-sum game.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like either I win or you win. But both of us cannot win.
Right, that's a fallacy, absolutely.
That's, like the fixed pie fallacy. That's what it is. So when women negotiate, that kind of goes out the window because women come at negotiation from a perspective of how can we both benefit. And in the negotiating realm, that kind of increases the size of the pie. So like you both can get what you want in a mutually beneficial way.
Right. So, and to be clear, this book was recommended to you, just to give people some context, this book was recommended to you by a man.
Yes.
Who holds a fairly high position in a fairly major materials company. And I mean, major. And so, I mean, just for perspective, that this,
right.
This wasn't, you didn't get this at college. There was, I mean, because I think some people would want to start bantying out, oh, you heard that there, blah, blah, blah. No.
No, he was my supervisor. He's been trained in management, and he's giving me this book about management for females.
Right. Yeah.
Also for males. I mean, men can listen to this book and get something out of it.
And get perspective. Too. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. I wholeheartedly agree with that. Yeah. So, okay. So you finished that great book.
Yeah, it was a wonderful book, and I'm very glad that I read it, and I'm going to have to tell him thank you at some point.
Yeah, absolutely.
But after I finished that book, I moved on to the book that I'm reading now, which is written by Zecharia Sitchin.
Woo! Keep talking.
I know, the ancient alien theorists out there, their ears are tingling right now. The Lost Book of Enki is what I'm reading.
So the full title here is The Lost Book of Enki, Memoirs and Prophecies of an Extraterrestrial God. And it's from 2001 by Zecharia Sitchin. So I will, of course, let you talk about the book, but just quickly, this is a book I'm very familiar with. We have been talking about it back and forth, you and I. I was honored to have a friendship with Zecharia Sitchin, basically up until the day he died. And actually now we just a couple weeks ago would have celebrated the 10th anniversary of his passing, because he died in October of 2010. And anyway, I've talked about that before, but yeah, this is a hell of a book. And well, anyway, why don't you go ahead if you want to tell a little bit about the story, and I can give a little more overview. But go ahead.
Okay, sure. So essentially, this book is about the Anunnaki who come from the planet Nibiru. And they travel to, there's a lot of story in here. I'm just giving the highlights. But essentially, they travel to Earth. They start mining gold for their atmosphere, which they need to repair their atmosphere so that they can continue to survive. But the work is really hard on Earth. So eventually what they do is they take primates that already exist on Earth and genetically modify them so that they're the perfect workers to gather gold for them. And over time, they end up becoming involved more and more with humans. They interbreed with them. They help them to develop civilization and are worshipped like gods. Right.
Yeah, basically, if you've ever seen like the fourth or fifth Return of the Apes movies, Planet of the Apes movies. This is Planet of the Apes, but it's humans. where they're made as a slave species, right? Well, perhaps a rebellion occurs or something like that. This is a book that is and is a great one for you to read, because have you ever read any of Zecharia Sitchin's other works?
No, this is the first one, and I know you said that I should have read the 12th Planet first. Or
yeah, would
it be now the 10th planet?
No, it'd be the 11th.
11th.
So Sitchin's really well known for the book The 12th Planet. So the reason that I said that, I mean, to understand, The Lost Book of Enki is basically a fictional. Would you say it reads like a biblical testament?
It does sound like ancient writings.
Right, like the Old Testament or New Testament, something like that, yeah. So it's a fictionalized, testamentized, if I can use that word, version of all of a lot of Zecharia Sitchin's research. And so it's kind of a quick, fun way for you to get the story that Zecharia Sitchin has been trying to tell people ever since late 60s, early 70s, when he first put out his book, The 12th Planet, which was a wild bestseller. Around the same time, Eric von Daniken was doing Chariots of the Gods and so on. The 12th Planet is great because it is, as to where this is, Sitchin would say it's not fiction, but it's fiction. It's a fictionalization anyway.
It's a dramatization.
Dramatization, yeah, sure. The 12th Planet is as hardcore an archaeological text with evidence, just like bleeding out of your nose and ears, as you can get. I mean, and so that's why I often recommend people read that first, because not because it tells the story better. I think the Lost Book of Enki does a great job of telling the story. It's because it gets you to take Sitchin a little more seriously than you would otherwise. Not that I think Sitchin is 100% right on anything. And I certainly am not a proponent of the ancient alien theory or ancient astronaut hypothesis or whatever term you want to use. But he raises points that need answers. And archaeologists have to provide answers. They have to provide complete answers to what they find. They are not allowed to let mysteries just sit, and they never have. And they don't, and sometimes that leads to very problematic conclusions. But bottom line being is that there are things that Sitchin brings up. Sitchin does try to provide an answer, but modern archaeology basically tries to ignore or call a fake or pretend doesn't happen. This book, reading it, I mean, are you convinced of what Sitchin's selling here? I mean, do you think the Anunnaki, these ancient gods, came back, came to Earth thousands of years ago, genetically altered humans? What do you got?
Well, you know me. I'm really skeptical about these things.
I'll say.
To say the least.
Yeah.
So I think the theory that he puts forth is really fascinating. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of ways in which his story fits in with other theological texts or historical texts.
Sure.
Mythology that has existed for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. And I really enjoy it. I think that the way that he describes it sounds very consistent, and it ties everything together. There's a line that you can draw from Nibiru all the way to, humans evolving into civilized beings.
Right.
So I find that really interesting, and I am enjoying listening to his perspective, mm-hmm. but I wouldn't say that I'm convinced.
Yeah. I mean, and even when you read his evidence, because he has tons of books. He has an entire Earth Chronicles series, where he presents the evidence for everything that he's laying out in Lost Book of Enki and everything. His explanation certainly makes more sense than God,
Sure. It sounds more scientific.
Right. He goes right into explaining basically wait a minute. So if life started in South Africa, where did the Adam and Eve story come from in Mesopotamia, thousands of miles away? It's well, that's because they took the apes from South Africa and genetically altered them in Mesopotamia. Right. He has good ideas. And the whole gold thing, before anybody calls that crazy, and you and I talked about this, the U.S. government themselves, but some odd 10, 11, 12 years ago, it was during the Obama administration, his scientific advisors were recommending that very thing. And that was a new idea. People thought that was far out stuff. Sitchin called
powdered gold in the atmosphere. You mean?
To help with climate change or whatever else. Sitchin said, no, that's what the Sumerians did. But he said that 30 years previous. You got to come up with a response for that. It's like, it's like, wait a minute. So, I mean, yes, granted, the government has a bunch of idiots, but you'd hope scientists have some brains that are involved. It's like, wait, you came up with this, but wait, we already had people, and he got this from some ancient text. I mean, Sitchin, I knew Sitchin. He's a great archaeologist, a very smart guy. He is no scientist. He is no engineer. Like, I mean, he couldn't have come up with that, is my point. Like, that's just not his field. He couldn't have gotten that lucky, in my opinion. He read that somewhere, and that was the idea. He interpreted things that way. And
he was a translator, right?
Yeah. And a lot of people say that he translated some things wrong, and he would adjust some of his work as years go on and everything. But at the time, I mean, he was one of like 6 people back in the 70s that could even read Sumerian. I mean, or, that could read, cuneiform. It was very rare that anybody could do that. Did he get some things wrong? Yeah, sure. I think so. And I don't believe, I don't want to give a percentage of how much I believe of what he talked about, but I think he raises some really, really interesting points. And at the very least, the one thing I can say with confidence is that he shows the Sumerians knew a whole hell of a lot more than should have been possible at all.
Can you give an example?
The gold flakes, Neptune being like the color of Neptune, and more details around that planet, a lot of details around the solar system itself. And I've on Sovereign Tech, I've talked about this before, anytime, because now the hunt for Planet 9, of course it's Planet 9 now instead of Planet 10 because Pluto got downgraded. The hunt for Planet 9, that's happening. That's being done by universities. That's scientific. I don't want to call it fact, but they're basically saying, yeah, there's got to be something that swoops in through the solar system here to explain some of what's going on. So the hunt is on for this thing. But most of Sitchin's life, he got laughed at the idea that there's some kind of planet that swoops through, or that there's another planet in, that's not necessarily part of the Kuiper Belt. I mean, he was laughed at. And now, oh no, yeah, we're looking for Planet 9. Yeah. So there's a lot of things that I think he ended up getting right. And I think there's actually a lot of archaeological evidence and points where there are corrections made, particularly within like Egyptian mythology, that he had called, at least in the 80s, maybe not in the 70s, but certainly by the 80s, well before anybody was considering it fact. So anyway, he again, the one takeaway I think that anybody can get from this is that, okay, no, these people knew a lot more than they should have. What does that mean? That's a whole other conversation to have, what that means. But I do think that that's proven. What do you got?
Well, I'm fascinated, truly, and I want to read more of his work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that I started on this book specifically because it captures my imagination.
Right.
And that's really what I need in order to invest in like reading more about the historical fact, because traditionally I have not liked reading historical texts.
Sure. Yeah.
But this I think will really encourage me to.
Yeah, I would recommend, and for listeners who want to give this a shot as well, I'd recommend skipping right to The End of Days. That's like not his last book, but it's the last book of the Earth Chronicles. And I think it recaps a lot of the previous 6 books in the series and gets to the point. Because, you're constantly, I mean, in the book of Enki, correct me if I'm wrong, you're hearing about this cycle, right? And that, maybe the gods will come back or the Anunnaki will come back at a certain point. Is that accurate?
I'm not really sure what you're talking about. I mean, they do make journeys between Nibiru and Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And supposedly the years on Nibiru or the Shars are much longer than the years on Earth. Right. Yeah.
Well, anyway, if I think you will get left with a question of, okay, so when are these guys coming back? If it's a cycle, if this Nibiru comes back around. End of Days talks about exactly that. So, and what all of that might look like. So it's an interesting read, to say the least. And actually how it attaches things to a lot of Christian theology is interesting as well. So anyway, what other thoughts do you have on Book of Enki?
That's actually a good point, that a lot of Christian mythology, I'll call it that.
Yeah, no,
stories
absolutely.
from the Bible, supposedly, can all be explained through the Anunnaki. Especially these figures that did really amazing acts, or
right.
even like some of the things that God, the character God in the Bible does. In Sitchin's rendition, it's several different Anunnaki demigods.
Yeah. Which is not, and again, he's a Jewish guy, by the way. I mean, just to bring that up for whatever that's worth. But I think it's important, for me, with my fancy schmancy doctorate of divinity, which I do have. I'll point out that there's plenty of times in the Old Testament, and Jews don't like to think about it either. There's plenty of times in the Old Testament where, the very term Elohim is a plural term, and there's other aspects, or even in the Septuagint, where in the Old Testament, not the New Testament, where there's like Trinitarian ideas or claimed Trinitarian ideas. In the Old Testament, in Torah, I think there's plenty of moments where it's talking about God in a plural form. And I don't think it's referencing a Trinity. It might be referencing more something like perhaps what Sitchin is pointing at, that it was actually a bunch of different actors involved. So yeah, it's an interesting thing to bring up. Absolutely.
Yeah. And actually it's fascinating to me too, because it ties together multiple different mythologies.
Right.
Not just Christianity.
Yeah. And they all kind of blend together.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's a fascinating read. And I don't know too many books that actually do this sort of thing, where they try to go for they try to make it sound like a testament. They try to make it sound like the older New Testament or something like that. But I love it when it's done, because I don't know, there's just something very engaging about it. And granted, there's Mormons, they get into that, but yeah,
I think like the first week that I started listening to this book, I mentioned that to you, like this book is focusing on this really advanced alien race, but it's being spoken about in a really old English kind of form.
Yeah.
And I just love that it's a really cool juxtaposition.
Yeah. There's a book called The Book of Huram by Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas, where they try to create and they're Freemasons, like they're real ones. And they try to create a Freemasonic history, and they write basically what they call the Masonic Testament in it, where it reads like it's like the Old Testament or New Testament, but it's supposed to be, history according to Freemasons. And it's such an engaging read. I love it. Anyway, a lot of fun. So, anything else on Lost Book of Enki?
Not right now. I'm getting to the point where I think the Anunnaki are just about to leave Earth. So I guess I'll have an update next time I'm on the show. Yeah,
well, let's see if you read that, and if you happen to read End of Days, before next time you're on, which maybe not, that'd be an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah.
So the book that I finished recently, I actually started it a little bit back, then I stopped for a little while and I came back to it. Interestingly, it's fiction, totally fiction, but it posits a very plausible possibility of how you end up with things like you do in Torah, or how you end up with stories like in the Old Testament, kind of like what the Book of Enki is trying to explain, right? And the book's called Earth Abides. This is considered a literary classic. It's from 1949 by George R. Stewart. It's a very early post-apocalyptic novel. And this is I think this would be before Day of the Triffids, which I've reviewed that on the show in the past. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going over it, but basically in the 40s, I forget what exactly happens, but a huge chunk of humanity just dies. There's some kind of epidemic or whatever, and people just die. And you follow this character named Ish. His real name is Isherwood. something. And I think it's interesting that the name is Ish, because it kind of reminds me of Ishtar. And Book of Enki might actually have something to say about Ishtar. But I know people are going to hate me when I say this, but that's a road we're not going to go down right now. But I just do think that that's interesting, and I want to point it out because I haven't read anybody else bring that up. But Earth Abides, again, literary classic. And the way, I mean, at the time it was new, but if you've seen Walking Dead, or if you've seen any of the new horse shit that comes out that gets called entertainment, it feels a lot like that. A lot of the tropes are there, but again, they weren't tropes when George Stewart wrote it. I find, because when you get toward, and I'm not really giving anything away because it's a journey you really have to experience, but basically they are, after civilization kind of falls, they're using a lot of what's left over from civilization, but eventually that starts to fail. And the character of Ish, who's the main character, he has to constantly deal with the fact that, like, the children that are getting born after this fall, they don't care to read. They don't they're not interested in learning how all these things work or in fixing things and whatever else. They just want to, go about their peaceful, happy lives. And so all these things just start to disappear and fall away and stop working. And there's a lot of really deep psychological subjects, but here that it gets into, like, he has this hammer, and that eventually becomes the symbol. Like this guy, because Ish is like the last guy who understands how any of this stuff works, very much becomes a Moses or like Abrahamic character towards the end. And when you read it, you can really see how, maybe all these stories about Abraham and Moses and whatever, they were holdovers from some other civilization. And like how we read them now is just the best way that their descendants could describe them, because like eventually Ish becomes what's called the last American, and it smacks very much of, say, like Moses, or, he wasn't the last Hebrew, but, kind of very similar concepts. When you read it, there's no supernaturalism at all involved, but it makes a lot of sense of how a story like the stories we know from particularly the Pentateuch, the books of Moses, could have come about in a very rational, reasonable way that could have happened 50 years ago. It's really, really wild for that. But the one thing is that to get to that payoff, and I recommend it, it's a long book, and you're going to have to go through 3/4 of the book before you get that payoff. It's interesting. It's interesting stuff, albeit tropey today, for that first 3/4, but that last quarter, everything comes together, and you do walk away from it going, wow, I wonder if that's how these things happened. It's speculation, but it's fun. Excellent book.
So do you think the author wrote this book with that intention in mind?
Had to. It's too, there's too many illusions. And right down to where, like, there's a point where Ish can't really see, and it's almost like a Jacob and Esau kind of story that he experiences. It just totally smacks of, I think the author absolutely had to do that. And I've read some reviews, and they basically understand that he kind of did, but I don't know that enough people went far enough with what George R. Stewart was really laying out with this. But it is an interesting juxtaposition to the Lost Book of Enki. I would say that they could fit together nicely. Like, if you read those back to back, you would walk away with a very interesting perspective, I think.
You think that if I had read this book, that I'd be more convinced of the Anunnaki hypothesis?
No, because I'd see it more as an alternative, possibility. Just that it like the Book of Enki can do, it raises questions of, what if that's how this happened? And
kind of implying that there's something that came before. Yeah. And how that something that came before can disappear, as well as be vastly misconstrued into the future, which I personally think has happened. I've brought that up many times on the show, that I think that there were pre-advanced civilizations, and we're talking like before Göbekli Tepe, but
Go ahead.
So I think that it's really interesting because one thing that people seem to not truly understand is how quickly information can disappear when it's not being actively preserved or replicated.
Or when there is a societal trauma that occurs. Yeah.
Yeah. No, major happenings. The evidence can just, wither away very quickly. Especially like as people age, they forget, they die. Information can be lost. And it can happen within like 30 years.
Yeah, or frankly, even less. I've brought this point up many times. In fact, it was a book that we talked about during Sovereign Tech Book Club a few episodes ago. The book by Dr. Greger, How to Survive a Pandemic. In that, he lays out how the instant that the Spanish flu was resolved, the instant it was resolved, not 10 years down the line, the instant it was resolved, people stopped talking about it like it never happened.
They just wanted to move on.
Yes. You had a societal amnesia, self-imposed, that just happened. And I mean, and people like, the amount of the buildings, there are whole terms that we have that we still use today that come from the response to dealing with the rampant amount of bodies involved with the Spanish flu, with the deaths that we still use today. Nobody knows that that's what those terms mean because nobody wanted to remember. And so it's a real case where, life in society was this terror at one point. But then one day, nobody remembered.
I wish we could put a bookmark in this conversation and come back to it a year from now or 2 years from now.
Oh, and how's it going to be with COVID?
Yeah, exactly. How are people going to respond to the coronavirus pandemic and possibly its resolution?
Yeah, I mean, the difference here is that the internet doesn't forget. Back then, newspapers could. The internet cannot. And so, I don't know that it's ever going to necessarily happen that way again, but I agree with you. And that's something I certainly keep in mind.
Well, the information's not going to disappear off of the internet. It'll always be in data banks somewhere. But does that mean that people are going to be talking about it, or it will be an active part of people's memory?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you already have plenty of people who basically want to pretend it doesn't exist, and that it's not something that's happening or whatever. And I'm not, taking any sides on that. I'm just saying that there are those people. So yeah, I agree with you. We'll bookmark it. I think it's something that we'll keep an eye on, but for me, that's such a fascinating notion. Because I agree with you. In a generation, sure, things can disappear. That in 30 years, people can forget about stuff. I mean, that happens every day.
There are kids now who don't know what a VCR is.
Exactly. Yes. Bingo. Right. But for it to happen so instantaneously, as in literally overnight, is remarkable. But it has to be deaths in the millions, it has to be deaths at that scale to where that can happen. It has to be that traumatic, but it can happen. And I mean, in Earth Abides, it's exactly what they're laying out, is that, just overnight, a ton of people dead, and people just kind of move on. And the generation that comes next has no fucking clue. Fascinating reading, a great book to this day, in my opinion, and deal with the tropes because this was a trendsetter. If you don't say, well, I already watched Walking Dead, so I don't need to read Earth Abides. No, stop watching Walking Dead or stop all your modern zombie media because it's crap and go read Earth Abides. Okay. Cause that's not. So see, I'll get in my jab somewhere on modernity. I took my shot. Anyway, that's the book that I was reading, and we don't have to deep dive on it any further. But a really, really solid read. I have been reading, I've been reading my usual Star Wars books. I've been rereading the Anita Blake series in between all of that, but that's kind of the one big book that I think is relevant to kind of what we're talking about here. So anyway, unless you have anything else you want to bring up, Ellen, we can take a break and we'll come back, and we got to get into some stories.
Sure, sounds good to me.
All right, let's do it. We'll be right back with more Sovereign Tech. Woo! Hey, is Sovereign Tech not enough for you? Well, let me tell you about something you'll never get enough of. No, I mean it. We're talking about a radio show and podcast that goes all night long, 7 nights a week, 3 hours a night, 365 days a year, and has been going since the early aughts, baby. I am talking about none other than Free Talk Live. It's the show you control. That's right. It's an open phones call-in show that is ready for you. And if you're worried that your voice isn't going to get heard, don't be. We are talking about the only libertarian radio show stateside. And not only that, it's also the number 26 talk show in the United States. Start listening now and go ahead and hit that massive back catalog at freetalklive.com. The Golden Stallion guarantees a good time, and you might even find some episodes with me on them when you do. That's freetalklive.com, and we thank them for sponsoring Sovereign Tech. Let's get back to the show.
The main story.
And we are back. I mean, frankly, so Ellen, we've been going over an hour now already.
Well, you've been going.
Well, you've been going. Are you kidding me?
You've been going on and on. No, I'm kidding. That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, I'm the host.
You're the host.
But regardless, I mean, I don't know how we fit this in. This is the biggest challenge with doing the show, at least. And I think this is true for a lot of people. I don't know. 2020 is that weird year where it seems like there's people who have nothing to do. And then there's the other half, or maybe it's not half, who, just have too much. I think you and I fall in the latter.
More than ever before. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we are nonstop. I mean, we're basically, I mean, that's the hardest part for me is squeezing in, a full 2 hours to get in a full episode. And you could say, well, you can record it in pieces, but that's not how the show rolls.
No,
you know how that goes.
Yeah. You lose the drive, the motivation, the energy,
the theme,
yeah.
that sticks through and where you can, call back to what you're talking about previously, because ultimately I think a lot of what we were talking about, even during the book club, speaks very much to what we're about to get into.
Yeah, actually to a lot of what we've, been doing or consumed in the last week.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we, again, you did have some time off for Thanksgiving. I kind of had a day off, but we decided, you know what, look, we're driving ourselves nuts. I mean, because we're just nonstop, I'm working, you're doing, your school thing, the whole thing. We got to get away. And so
we basically reverted to our childhood selves for a day.
Yeah. Well, we ran up north. I mean, we were just like, all right, we got to change the scene. We just got to get out of here, know? And so we ran up north. And we did what we do.
We had fun in a hotel room.
Yeah.
For whatever that means.
Take that how you want it. But we also got in a couple of flicks anyway while we were out and about.
Yeah.
And one of them I think we should talk about now. And I want to review it because it speaks to what is actually our main story, which has to do with Elon Musk. And ironically, I think you might have been on the last time we were talking about Elon Musk. But
well, all right.
Yeah. But it'll get to that. But I think we were in the hotel room, and we were kind of exhausted because we just got done doing things. And you're like, hey, you got to have a movie, Brian. Like, we got something we can watch.
You've always got something on hand.
I do. You see, my computer is my country, and my country is bountiful.
Rich in entertainment.
Oh, is it? And I'm just like listing off all these movies that I happen to have on a micro SD card. The internet for the hotel, because it's up north, and I don't see this as a problem, I see it as a good thing, was incredibly slow. So Plex wasn't exactly going to be up to snuff to play some movies off of there. And I didn't bring any Blu-rays with me. So we had what we had on hand, which was a large selection, but we were looking for specific things. And you basically said, you know what? It was the end of the night. I think it was after 10 p.m.
Yeah, which is late for us.
Right. Usually we're going to sleep at around that time.
but we're having wild and crazy nights. So,
so it kept on going.
Yeah.
And you had said, it's like, yeah, I feel like I need to watch a documentary. And I don't know if it's because, we felt like we had to get in touch with more of our intellectual side after spending so much time with our animal side. Maybe.
Well, maybe. Well, to be honest, I mean, I won't break it down entirely, but
sure.
I've been spending so much time just focused on, coursework.
Right.
And I haven't really had time to consume the media that I want to, or learn about things that I actually feel passionate about. And we had that opportunity.
Yeah.
And also, you and I both love documentaries.
Absolutely.
We've talked about this before, how many documentaries we want to watch together. So
yes.
It just felt right.
Yeah. I mean, and it's rare for us to be able to take in long form content, frankly, because we get in audiobooks, but usually we're listening to those at higher speeds or whatever. And just by their nature, they're easy to take in chunks, as to where, much like I was just saying about an episode of Sovereign, a documentary, you really don't want to watch that in pieces.
No.
Like, you want to get that all in one shot because it's giving you an entire narrative. It's important to keep that in mind. We might talk about that when we talk about this particular documentary. But that's important. I mean, we play video games here and there, but it's because it's something we can squeeze in for 30 minutes to an hour.
Sure. Or when we watch Star Trek, that's like the amount of time it takes us to eat dinner.
Exactly. So it just fits, but otherwise we wouldn't do it. Which, by the way, I mean, how far along would you say you are in Super Mario Sunshine?
I'm pretty far. I've got, over 80 shine sprites.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
So far I've gone through at least 3 or 4 of the worlds, and I've gotten all of the blue coins. I've gotten all the shine sprites. So yeah, I'm over halfway through the game, if not farther. There's no real way for me to gauge. I don't remember exactly how many shine sprites are in the game, but I know based on the worlds that I am aware of, I've over 50% completed it.
Right, because it's not a totally linear game.
Right. As you progress, more and more things become revealed to you. Yeah.
So you're getting into mini game talk here, folks, because we're not going to have a full game talk segment. But yeah, now you're playing this on the original GameCube. You're not playing the version Super Mario 3D All-Stars on the Switch, which I do have, but you're playing this on the OG GameCube.
The GameCube controller is awesome. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, I'm a fan. It's one of my favorites. Not as good as the Duke, but it's up there. Yeah. So anyway, you're having a good time with that.
Yeah. I'm actually getting really good at it.
You're the whole reason I picked up a GameCube, because we wanted to play Double Dash, and I'm a master of entertainment. That's really, really what I'm best at. But
well, now that we know that I can kick your ass at Double Dash, we don't play it anymore.
Oh, you beat me at pretty much every game.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. So, but yeah, I've been getting in some time with my Saturn, which has been a really, really great time.
Yeah, you've really been working on that.
Oh, man. Yeah, because I'll be doing a whole show about it, because it was an experience putting this thing together. But what a dream playing that fucking thing, playing an original Sega Saturn, but slightly enhanced. It's just magical. So, but anyway, I will, I have my mode in it. Tons of games, man. It's so sad. Like, I feel like we got to get into this story, but I just feel like, I'm surrounded by so much fun, so many things that I could do. And it's like, when you have all that stuff, you just can never touch it. It's a weird, I don't know, life works out that way, but it's not like we're locked up in a biosphere or anything. However, 8 people were for a couple years back in the early 90s. And we watched an entire documentary about this matter. Documentary is called Spaceship Earth, and it was released in 2020. I don't know how long they took exactly to produce it. It's about 2 hours long, the documentary overall. It's made by Matt Wolf, who he's done other documentaries, but nothing really that stands out to my mind. But this is all about the biospherians. This is all about the 8 people. And I remember this when I was a kid. I was probably around 10 when this ended up becoming a thing. The 8 people, and as well as the entire group. It's an organization. It's literally like a legal corporation, but this entire group that made this come together back in the early 90s. And what they're trying to do is the idea was that 8 people would go into this biosphere, this environment planned, that would simulate what a colony perhaps would be like on another planet. And they would do it for 2 years and they'd never leave. And it was supposed to be, everything was supposed to be self-contained, self-sustaining, the whole thing for 2 years. This was, this was the talk of the town from like 91 to 93. I can remember it pretty vividly. It is, as the documentary would showcase, it was not done with with what scientists would consider scientific rigor, at least not enough, as far as that goes. And, probably the first hour of it had nothing to do with the biosphere itself. It had to do with this group that was more or less founded by this guy named John Allen. And it was like a hippie group, but they didn't do drugs, right? Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah. So this group was essentially formed out of the desire to have a theater group. Mm-hmm. It was sort of like, it was formed in like, I think late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
At a time when people were really experimenting with things like communes.
Yep.
So it was kind of like their own little commune, but they didn't do drugs at all. Because that would have taken away from their productivity. But they did.
And they were productive.
Yeah, they did.
Holy shit.
Really incredible things. Like, they had the theater group, but they also built boats and hotels and, they were
art galleries. They have businesses.
They were so prolific.
Yeah, they have businesses literally all around the world that they founded. But when you watch the movie, like, especially when they're doing their theater, it seems like you're hippie avant-garde types, but oh no, like these people were capitalists with a capital fucking C. Holy shit. It's impressive. And most of these businesses, they still own to this day and still operate, like in London and other places. Continue. Yeah.
So anyway, I think a lot of these businesses, they did because they just needed to make money in order to stay alive. And to continue funding their projects, which were really amazing. And like, I part of me wants to have been part of this group or wishes that I could have been because once they set their minds to something, they did it.
Yeah.
Like they even built their own like self-sustaining ranch out in the desert. Yep. Which was really
Synergy
incredible.
Ranch. Is that what it's called?
Synergia or something like that.
Synergy Ranch, I think. But anyway, continue.
But I just remember being so fascinated by the story about them building a ship. Like they built a ship, the Heraclitus.
Yes.
They had never done anything like this before, but they had a whole team of people just come together and learn their own individual skills and put it together. And when they finally pulled it into the water, it floated. And they even had a guy who knew like stellar navigation.
Yes.
So anyway, it was just amazing to think that like at that time you could really get a group of people who shared a vision together, build something, and travel around the world.
Yeah, we're not even talking, I don't even think there was 20 people.
No.
Through the bulk of the history of this group. And basically it's a theater troupe, like that's what they were, whatever is called the Theater of Impossibilities or something like that. Yeah, when they build that ship and it gets towed out, were you expecting that thing to capsize instantly?
It just keeps going down and down and down, and then suddenly it raises up.
Yeah.
And you're like, holy shit, they did it!
and they traveled the world.
Yeah.
They absolutely traveled the world.
They went everywhere.
Yeah. The thing is that a lot of what this group did, legally, they would just run into so much red tape, they'd suffocate from it. Today. Like you could only do this in a very lax legal environment. But they did it. And again, all this stuff has sustained itself. I don't know what happened to the Heraclitus. I know they're building a new one. Like they said that at the end of the documentary. But what a remarkable group. And what a remarkable human story.
Yeah, they could literally do anything.
Right.
It just felt like they were very powerful in that once they set their mind to doing something, they could achieve any goal.
Now, granted, there's a ace in the hole for them. And that is a guy named Ed Bass, who is the second oldest son of the Bass family, which is, I mean, they're Texas oil tycoons. I mean, all the money you could want, in a very real way. And he became like really good friends, or I don't know if there's any kind of mentorship because the leader of the group, John Allen, who's apparently this very charismatic guy, even though I never thought the documentary showed him as being particularly charismatic.
Well, no, they didn't include much film about him or centering on him necessarily.
But Ed Bass was a young guy. John Allen was older, so I mean, I guess Ed Bass just thought John Allen was this really brilliant dude and funded a lot of his stuff. So, I mean, they had that going for them, is that they had an oil tycoon basically backing them up. We don't know to what degree, but most of what they did, I feel like, enterprising individuals could pull it off. Like even the boat, like they could pull it off without an Ed Bass type character. Basically, they had meetings where they just explored ideas. And one of them had this idea of how do you make a space habitat?
Yeah, they actually set up a series of conferences where they invited like scientific minds, people who are scientists, architects, environmentalists, and they basically just talked about like, the biggest concerns of the planet, which was, like longevity. Can we travel to other places? Like the Earth is our home, our biosphere, but it's not going to be that way forever if we keep trashing it.
Yeah, I mean, they would have like a lot of guys that would later become pivotal in, say, talks around climate change and, all these other things. And anyway, it was definitely, at the time, like advanced stuff, whether or not John Allen understood any of it is a whole other conversation. Or if, I mean, maybe you got the abstract notions, but.
Well, I'm sure these people understood it. They had a very, it seemed like a very deep concern and understanding for the Earth's biosphere. It's just, they weren't the ones that were performing the experiments, they weren't writing the papers or anything.
Right. Well, so one of their group, not one of the like scientists that came in for the talks, but one of their group basically had this idea, and he did this like spherical model of what a space habitat would look like. John Allen saw it and says, all right, that's what we're doing. And everybody just looks at him, just like when they built the Heraclitus and everything else. And like, okay, that's what we're doing.
And Bass was really into it. Like he heard about this and he thought it was very important.
Yeah. And John Allen said he made it very clear that, like John Allen made it clear that, okay, the first biosphere might not work. It'll take a few other tries, but we're going to keep learning as we do it until we get it right. And Ed Bass thought the money in it was that, we would figure out how to make space colonies. And I'm sure he thought that he'd get some patents out of it or something like that. Or
that maybe he'd have like a hand in owning the first extraterrestrial station.
Right. So he saw the money in that, and so because this group, this theater troupe could not build the biosphere. This building is gorgeous, is huge. It's all glass. I mean, like, it's really, really impressive. I mean, you have entire construction teams from around the world coming to build this damn thing.
Sure. Maybe they couldn't build it on their own, but they got all the right people together, having the right conversations, and they hired the right people to do it. So even though they themselves weren't the experts, they had this sort of like synergistic skill where they could bring together all of the right people and motivate them.
Yes, that's true. They could pull that off. So they do this. They build it. They go. They choose their 8, and they go in, and they do it for 2 years. Now there's varying drama that occurs within that. One gal gets her like the tip of her finger chopped off, and she has to get surgery, so she has to go outside of the dome or outside of the sphere, and there's controversy because she brings in 2 duffel bags back with her. They weren't supposed to get anything from the outside. She brought in stuff from the outside. There's all these different things that occur where they make claims against the very concept of the biosphere itself, and what it was doing. What do you got?
Oh, I'm just interested in like the biosphere design. They don't talk much about this, but I think it's really fascinating that they included like different ecological systems all within the same biosphere and not necessarily separated by hard boundaries.
Right.
Maybe some of them were, but they had like desert, they had ocean, they had a rainforest and a marsh. And they went out all around the world and collected life forms from these unique places and brought them into the biosphere.
Kind of like Enki did with the Sumerian, or sorry. No.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they even say it. It's very Noah's Ark, like what they're pulling off. And one of the guys involved, who's one of the 8, it's funny because he directly referenced something we're actually going to talk about later in this episode. He directly referenced the movie Silent Running. Right. From 1972. Which we just recently watched. It just recently came out on Blu-ray. I grabbed the Blu-ray and we checked it out. And this, the biosphere itself looks exactly like the ship out of the Valley Forge.
It does kind of have a geodesic design.
Yeah, it looks very much like right out of Silent Running. And I think that they designed, like the idea that you were just describing with the different zones and everything that they did on the inside is very much like Silent Running, which, is important. It was made by Doug Trumbull, a brilliant guy who definitely saw ahead with things, who was the special effects wizard behind 2001: A Space Odyssey and so on. So it's not like they weren't pulling from great material. It's not like they didn't have great inspiration, but we can talk about Silent Running more later. So these zones, in this Noah's Ark concept.
Yeah. And so maybe the group that put together this idea, they weren't scientists, but there were scientists inside the dome. They had a marine biologist. I don't think she was an entomologist. Maybe she was, she worked with plants.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly what her title was, but she was definitely into the study of plants. Mm-hmm. They had a medical doctor there as well. They had a guy who just could work with all of the mechanical parts and the computer.
Just an engineering genius.
Right. So they did have a handful of actual scientists in there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there was controversy around the 2 duffel bags. Supposedly there was just clothes and some computer parts that were coming in. But that first critique is actually one of the major critiques of the overall project, which is that, the motivation behind this wasn't strictly just scientific. Yes, there was scientific discovery, kind of wrapped up in this whole idea. And that was the main purpose of it. But the execution wasn't, strictly speaking, according to the scientific method.
Yeah, so it wasn't 100% self-sustaining. It was self-containing, but it wasn't 100% self-sustaining.
Right.
And that there is a drastic difference between those 2 terms. And that's an important thing to bring up. It's a documentary. Modern documentaries, unfortunately, as much as I wish documentaries were still made like Jacques Cousteau would do, or Ascent of Man or Cosmos, documentaries today feel like they have to include drama in them. And there's real world drama that happened with this, like the duffel bags and some other things. But all that stuff, whatever, people think that makes something engaging and it's included in it. I think one point I want to bring up, and then I kind of want to talk about more of the viability on this. But also if you have other points that you want to get into, I want to bring those up as well. This is considered a failure. The biosphere was considered a failure. Would you say that's fair?
I guess that's how the media portrayed it.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily feel that way, but we can talk about that more after we're done discussing it.
Okay. So, there's a conversation to have around all of the data that they were collecting this whole time in the biosphere. Guess what, folks? That's gone. It's either gone or not accessible.
Yeah, they were collecting data on carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, all these chemical markers. They were collecting data on tons of stuff, like the plants that were living and dying, and
right.
They were recycling everything.
Right.
They had to cook everything based on what they had inside, which was a lot of beets and bananas and
every cake was made out of banana. Yeah. Anyway, when it fails, or at least its original 2-year version fails, because now it's owned by the University of Arizona and they're still doing some kind of experiments there, but it's nothing like the biosphere.
I don't think it's fair to say that it failed. Their 2-year mission was completed, and they came out, and after that, basically the top people in the organization were fired by Bass and replaced.
Yes. So that's the point I want to get to, is just to bring this in about the movie itself. It doesn't have to do with our larger conversation. I can believe This entire documentary got made for the last 15 minutes that has nothing to do with the experiment itself. The guy who took over for John Allen when he got kicked out, like you were just describing, was Steve Bannon.
That's Steve Bannon.
Trump Steve Bannon. That guy, alt-right Steve Bannon, whatever, Breitbart Steve Bannon. And I could believe this entire documentary was funded just to be a hit piece against Steve Bannon. Not that I have a problem with that. You want to do hit pieces, on any politician. I am in support of you. And I don't care if it's Democrat, Republican, or whatever, okay? Because fuck them all. But I'm just saying that if I had a guess as to, wait, how did this documentary get made? I think that's where the money on that came from.
Because somebody had dirt on Steve Bannon.
Yeah, because, right, they had recordings of him, like, being brutal about what he did to John Allen. And I mean, like, he does not walk away looking like any kind of a good guy. And they save it. It's like it's the zinger at the end, the attack on Steve Bannon. So I'm just putting that in there, that I think that's how this movie got made. But that's the end of that conversation. Like I don't have any other point to go with that, because this whole thing is still fascinating.
Yeah, there were so many other fascinating parts about this whole experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you were saying that it was considered to be a failure. I don't necessarily think that it has to be a failure.
Agreed.
I think within the first year, when it came to winter and the sun was coming through less and less, they had a decrease in the amount of vegetation that was growing, of course, which means that their oxygen production was going down and CO2 was building up.
Right.
And they got an emergency supply of oxygen pumped into their system.
Yes.
And the media was going crazy over this, saying that it was a failure, it wasn't scientifically rigorous, things like that. And there were even people that were fired from the project or quit voluntarily, saying, like, this is just environmentally conscious drama. They're just trying to raise awareness.
They called it, like, ecological entertainment. That's
right.
what they called it, yeah.
Not that it was scientific, even though they were running tests. But I get where they're coming from. Like, there could have been more scientifically rigorous testing done. There could have been a more clearly outlined plan. But the management was turning secretive because the media was portraying them as failures.
Yeah, and like the finance gal or the marketing gal for the whole thing, she said, look, if they were just honest about the fact that there was a pipe that they could feed in oxygen, or, that they could feed in CO2 or whatever, if they were just honest about all these things, like the scrubber, the carbon scrubber, if they were honest about all these elements, that she thinks the media would have backed off.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I agree. Like, I think that, I mean, for me, like, actually with this show, with Sovryn Tech itself, so much of what I get to scream and holler about is the marketing, because Google says they're doing X when I go, no. Wait, if you're doing X, then Y is Z, like this doesn't add up. And it's because the marketing language, just people trump stuff up way too much. And so they sold this as self-containing if they didn't, or self-sustaining. If they didn't sell it as self-sustaining, all these arguments that the media brought up, all the drama would have meant nothing, because, like, we never claimed that, that's what they could have said.
But it doesn't even matter, because they knew from the beginning this was a trial and error experiment that might not work out the way that they wanted it to, but they were going to learn from it, and that's the most important thing to do. If you genuinely are interested in getting people off of the planet somewhere else where they can live in a self-sustaining environment, at least a place that self-sustains for 6 months at a time.
Right.
And then can get shipments, which is not unreasonable.
No, it happens with the ISS.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if it had been seen from that perspective by the media, I think things would have been, there would have not been a problem. But also, just being forthright and honest from the team about what they were doing and what the purpose was and what they were able to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think that it was all portrayed in a bad way, unnecessarily. And that's why it was considered a failure. But it was not, and it doesn't have to be. It's only a failure if nobody continues the experiment.
Right.
Right? That's what they said from the beginning. It's going to fail, but we need to learn from it and keep going.
Yeah, we'll do a better one next time.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, let me ask you 3 questions. 1, do you recommend people watch this documentary?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you think it was a good documentary?
I thought it was a good documentary. I mean, the first hour is not about the biosphere at all.
Right.
But it's about the group, and you kind of learn more about the people involved in the group and how it came to be.
Yeah.
And that in itself is an experience.
Right. Okay. So you don't, I'm asking a question. You don't consider the biosphere, that 2-year experiment, to be a failure?
Again, I only think it's a failure if it's not repeated. I think it was a failure on the part of the new team that was instituted, that they destroyed the data.
Yeah. Yeah. Or
that
locked it away or whatever.
A total shame. I mean, the people who collected that data weren't even able to interpret it and present it.
So now I'm at like 4 or 5 questions.
Okay.
So you think that this experiment was absolutely worthwhile? We've got a story here. Musk is talking about that he's going to get 1 million people on Mars before you know it in his lifetime. And he is not that young of a man. Granted, he might think he'll live to 200, but regardless, do you think that this is worthwhile? Do you think more of these should have been done?
Yeah, I absolutely think that if Musk wants to send people to Mars, he needs to do this first.
Okay.
Because nobody is going to want to go live in an untested facility on another planet where you're not going to be able to survive. If there is no incoming oxygen, what's going to happen?
Right.
People are just going to die. That's why this needs to be done. The failure needs to happen here on Earth in a safe environment before they can transport the successful experiment up to Mars.
Okay.
To have a successful and safe place for people to live.
All right. Let me ask you this question now, because this kind of leads directly into that. Do you think, because the media claimed this at the time, do you think that this theater troupe and, the 8 people that went in, do you think that they were a cult or part of a cult?
No, I don't think they were part of a cult.
You don't think John Allen was a cult leader?
I think maybe, and this is said in the documentary too, there are characteristics of a cult that can be seen in the group, but it's also said that that's kind of the par for the course for like startups.
Yes.
That people are really a close-knit group and they have their own sort of language. They have an internal understanding. And there's generally one charismatic leader, and that's John Allen. So I think there might be some sort of like cult recognition within their group, but I didn't see any red flags. There wasn't anything that necessarily told me like he's a sociopath or these people are, they're following this guy blindly. It didn't seem that way at all. It seemed like they all had their own, they were all able to think and speak freely. Like they weren't just following him exactly to the letter. And they were all taking part in an organization that was doing something beneficial. And of course, they weren't doing drugs either.
I mean, that part impressed the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Because like I
a commune from the 70s?
Right.
And nobody's doing drugs?
Yeah. I mean, and obviously I think it's great. I mean, if people want to do drugs, I don't care. I really don't care. But I'm not gonna lie. I felt some vindication watching this sort of thing, because I mean, I'm an infamous teetotaler. And anyway, I was just very impressed by that. That they didn't. And I think it's good too, because then you can't write them off.
Right.
As just being like an LSD cult or something like that,
They don't seem crazy at all. They seem very sane. They're just a little quirky.
Definitely quirky, but I could even like their theater stuff that they're doing. I'm like, Yeah, shit, I've done that, I mean, if I'm ever home alone, I act like Animal out of the Muppets. I mean, I'm just going, banging the drums. I mean, like, come on, that's exactly what I do. So that's nothing to me. Or hell, I'm talking to the cat all day. I mean,
you do talk to the cat a lot.
Yeah. So,
and one thing that I really admired was before they started the Biosphere project, they put together a play called The Wrong Stuff, which they acted out everything that could possibly go wrong in the biosphere. And I just thought that was so precious. Like, that's a really great way to deal with uncertainty.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Is to actually like play it out in your mind, and that way you're ready for it when it happens.
It's a very stoic thing to do.
Yes. Not just Stoics, but yes. Yeah.
Not just Stoics, but
yeah.
That's one thing that I think Stoics got right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Stoics get a lot right, but then also they're not unique to Stoicism by any stretch.
Okay,
so,
well, still,
but that's fine. But let's call it where it is. So okay, yeah. I mean, to your statement, I'll just say quickly to your statement. I do agree that I think any like really new venture that is more than 2 or 3 people does have at the very least cultish aspects, if not an environment that could very readily fit into the definition of a cult. And so I think it had cultish aspects, but no different than Google or Facebook or, go down the list of most startups. I mean, I go online and I see like, companies that I think are pushing a great technology, like say solar power. And I see the most terrifying things with these employees that blow my mind and make me want to run away from solar energy more than be, inspired by it. But I digress. So I get that. Do I think that these are worthwhile experiments? Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Even for the psychological aspects of it, what is it like to have 8 people together for that long, for 2 whole years? I mean, yes, they still have the comfort of being on Earth and all they have to do is walk out the door if things get bad enough. There's that. But even to prep people for it, the average person, I mean, I think that's important to do. So I do think that it's a very important experiment. And maybe Pauly Shore has to break into the damn thing, and shake it up a little bit to really know if it's going to work. But and some people will know about that, but go ahead.
The questions that you don't know. I mean, in this experiment, they could have learned so much about the Earth. Actually, the people who are in the biosphere were saying they could see, based on the data they were collecting, how their individual actions really in real time impacted their environment. Yeah.
Yeah. So I walk away from this. Again, I think it's very worthwhile. I think the data, and I don't care how skewed or you could say contaminated the data is that they collected based upon the fact that they got, CO2 fed in or whatever. I think there's worthwhile information to take from there. Even just on the farming practices, I think there's worthwhile information to take away from that. I am bothered profoundly, actually, that data is not accessible to anyone. Even the University of Arizona isn't touching it.
And I'm bothered that nobody has tried to repeat this since then.
Right. So, yes. And especially when, like I said, we have a story here. We don't have to read the whole thing. We can kind of just get into it a little bit here. Elon Musk is talking about, in very short order, going to Mars and making cities on Mars with pizza joints, the whole damn thing, and at least 1 million people. He's going to do 100 people a year. He's going to start schlepping up there. And he's not bothering with any of these kinds of experiments, but it's supposed to be happening within his lifetime. I don't believe it. So the story that we've got, let me just punch it up quick from Science Alert, and anything else, Ellen, you want to add in about the spaceship Earth thing. I mean, as it melds in with this, these are conversations that coalesce. So actually, this is originally from Business Insider. It's from November 4th, 2020. Here's the headline: Elon Musk's SpaceX now wants to impose its, quote, own legal regime, end quote, on Mars. Now, I think that the legal thing is its own story, and we're going to talk about that. But I mean, when you read the story, link is in the show notes, folks, you're going to see just how quickly he's looking to make this happen. But he's not, like, if I were Elon Musk and I was going to start putting people on Mars in this quick a fashion, I would be begging for that data. If there's anything left, and there's got to be something, I would be begging for that data from the biosphere. I would be setting up other biospheres.
Yeah, definitely. Set up test, there should be test sites for these Mars colonies.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, get people fucking ready, because they're not coming back. I mean, Elon's been incredibly transparent about that part, is that, guess what, folks, when you go to Mars, you're staying. Like you don't come back.
Wow, really?
Yeah. Yeah. He said that like the first however many, hundreds or thousands of people, it's going to be a one-way trip. So, or at least for a good chunk of those people, it'll be a one-way trip. So that, that's important to keep in mind. Well, get those fucking people ready now. Yeah. Go ahead, put them in you already have plenty of people today, a bunch of morons who think that, Mars rovers are just driving around in Arizona anyway. Well, if you're going to keep up the facade, just then fucking plant them there in a biosphere. And, so it leads me to believe the fact that no one is wanting to do these experiments again, because it's a great idea. Okay.
A necessary one, I would think.
Yes, I would agree. Or that they're not requesting that data does call I get a little conspiratorial about this. I'm thinking like, well, wait, are you really planning on going to Mars?
Exactly.
Because so when you read this entire story about the legal regime that Elon's trying, basically he's getting lawyers. He's trying to get it set up so that before they even do this, Earth or governments on Earth are going to recognize Mars as an independent state. Now, we know under President Clark how well that didn't work. Sorry, that's Babylon 5 reference.
Well, there is a real world reference in this story. It talks about Taiwan and how that hasn't been recognized by China, and it doesn't even have a seat at the UN.
Another case where just because, what one government says in a geographic area does not mean what another government believes in that same geographic area. China and Taiwan are another example of what I was talking about earlier, where the occupying force does not have to be the government or the actual recognized government within an area. But besides the point, yes, that it's a great corollary. First off, like, I'm insulted at basically these asshats. They're jonesing. They're getting hard-ons for it's like, ooh, give me laws right now, and it's so funny because Elon is supposed to be some goddamn libertarian hero. And here he is just like begging for recognition from governments. It's like, well, that doesn't smack very libertarian to me, but whatever.
Yeah. And he might argue that it's out of necessity because also discussed in this article, the government is responsible for any actions of U.S. citizens.
Correct.
Ultimately.
Right.
So the U.S. government would be responsible for anything that happened on Mars, even if it is owned by SpaceX.
Yeah, and what they go big into Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty that basically says you can't own anything outside of Earth. And obviously he wants to fix that. Frankly, I think that I don't know if he's going to get to Mars anytime soon. I think that, normal everyday people going into space is going to become commonplace in pretty short order. I don't know that Mars is the first part of that trip. I just think that he's trying to set up a legal framework to where he just gets to make an ass ton of money off of this. And that's really what he's pushing for here, is that he's trying to recreate he's trying to destroy the Outer Space Treaty. And I don't like the Outer Space Treaty more than anybody else, but it's not because I want to make money in space. I just don't like laws. But personally, I feel like that's what this is really about. And that's also why he's not really putting his money where his mouth is and building biospheres and getting that data. Because even like, and I said this before, because he was on Joe Rogan. I don't know if you remember that. He was smoking weed on Joe Rogan. And I said, that's a stall tactic. Like he knows better than that. Like Elon's not, he's dumb, but he's not that dumb. And he did that because he knew that would force NASA to go into all of his factories and hold up his entire process because he's stalling. He wants the legal framework set up to where, to where he can have whatever IP, or so that he can be, I don't know, maybe he wants to be set up as God on Mars. I don't know. What do you
Possibly. Got? I mean, it also says in this article, and take it for what you will, but supposedly the people who live on Mars will be able to determine their own rules and set up their own government and deal with things however they see fit. Mm-hmm. And that's the ultimate goal. But who knows if that's really going to be what happens. Frankly, this whole Mars settlement thing is an experiment, and ultimately there's a corporation behind it, so it's just new territory. We don't know what's going to happen. But sure. I certainly wouldn't want to be one of the first 10,000 or million people who go to live on the Mars colony, because something could happen where there's like a disagreement between the Musk corporation / government and the US government, or all of Earth, maybe.
Well, and again, things are guaranteed to go wrong because we're not even bothering to experiment here on what it would be like.
Yes.
And even when we have frameworks for experiments that you could do, like the biosphere, like Biosphere 2, which is what it was called, so that you could try that. I'm all about going to outer space, but I'm sure as fuck not going to live under any legal framework that Elon Musk is behind. Not a chance. I'll go up there under my own, individualistic, I don't want to say power, but, under my own individualistic framework. But I have no interest in playing ball with someone else's laws. I think that's ridiculous. And they're not even there yet, and they're already trying to legislate this fucker. It just drives me nuts. What do you got? Yeah.
No, you're right. And another thing that I feel trepidatious about is that if you were to go to Mars, you'd be putting your entire life in the hands of the engineering and, whatever government system, whatever infrastructure set up there. Mm-hmm. And you really have to trust that what they did was right and everything is going to work smoothly, because if anything goes wrong, if supplies are cut off, if there's a leak somewhere, people will die.
Yeah. And that's a great point, because, and it speaks to the biosphere thing again, they are not solving the engineering issues first.
And that's so essential.
Right. They're bothering with the legal shit, and it's just a waste of time. Just do it.
Yeah. It sounds like they're just starting the conversation. But yeah, why are they starting this conversation, but not like, we're going to rent out the biosphere for a year and see how people fare in there.
Right, because you can do multiple things at once, but they're not. What was the pi fallacy? What was it called?
Oh, the fixed pi fallacy.
Right, this doesn't have to be a fixed pi. You can do engineering, and if you really give a shit about the legal stuff, which I don't think you should, but if you think you need to, you can do both. At the same time, but you're not. And you're really not. He's not. You could say he's building his spaceport or whatever.
He's working on Neuralink.
And he's doing that, yeah. Here's just go land there. Just go. Just go fucking land there. And what's the United States going to do? What are they going to send nukes?
There's the Space Navy. But, how much?
Right, the Space Force, yeah.
Yeah, are they really invested in chasing down someone to Mars? That's really far away.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like all of this is so much stalling, and it's not serious, and he's playing way too much ball with governments. And I could kind of believe that the Space Force was created right now. The dumbest thing, if there was some kind of overarching government plan, not NWO, but some kind of plan there, I would not have built the Space Force under Trump, because that is always going to be a smear against it. That it was done under Trump. I would wait for the next guy. That at least people moderately liked, or at least vocal people moderately liked or something. But I think they felt they had to rush the Space Force in because this may happen. But then the reason it's not happening right away, like Musk is saying, he's not doing all the experimentation and everything, is because he's playing ball with them to let basically the U.S. military catch up with any plans for future colonization, in my opinion. So, is it going to happen? Is it going to happen in his lifetime? Maybe, landing on Mars. And I don't think it's going to be a 1 million person city in his lifetime. But I feel like there's a lot of things going on here, but the areas that need to be taken seriously and worked on are not being worked on at all. And so I don't feel that this action that Musk is engaged in is in any way meant to be beneficial for the individual, bottom line.
Yeah, and if they really want to start a new Mars colony, they're going to have to create a new science.
Right.
They're going to have to do more of these biosphere experiments.
Yeah.
And really, build up the infrastructure of knowledge that's needed in order to sustain people in that environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not be reliant on shipments from Earth.
Yeah. And it's just, yes, absolutely. And it's just so annoying, the idea that, we just want to make sure we're recognized by governments on Earth and everything. And it's like, astronauts themselves that have gone to the moon said, you know what, you look back and you see that ball, there's no countries. There's no, there's none of that. So like flags mean nothing when you're out there. It's all horseshit. They realize it when you get that galactic perspective that we always talk about on the show. And for him to want to pander at this stage is...
Yeah, I mean, it must be about the money because I wonder if he's trying to get this international or national government recognition before he starts doing the research, because he doesn't want to invest in the research and then, we can't go.
Right.
But even if some other corporation ended up doing this, the research would exist.
Yeah.
It would benefit humanity overall.
Yeah.
And if that's really what he's interested in, then fucking do it.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Just fucking do it. I mean, every time that people think he's doing something that is beneficial for everyone, it is all about his bottom line, not yours, his. For example, when he opened up the patents for the power systems, for, Teslas and for the batteries and everything, when he opened up the patents for that, why did he do that? He didn't do that because he thinks open source is a good idea. He did that because he doesn't have enough money to build the infrastructure to power and to recharge all of these cars.
He wants other people to do it for us.
Exactly. It has nothing to do with benefiting everybody. It was not because he had any kind of ethical inclination. It was completely about his bottom line. And that's the biggest problem with this, is that I feel like this is the same score where it is all about his bottom line. He is not, if he was coming from an ethical, from some kind of ethical imperative, or that he felt like, we got to get humanity to another planet right now. It does it at all costs, no matter what, which I appreciate that perspective that a lot of people have. It's like, look, we're on a ticking time bomb, here that if we're not a 2-planet species, we're fucked. And it could be tomorrow, and he's not acting under those auspices. He's not acting under any kind of ethical imperative, whatever. He's just looking, okay, how do we make the most money on Earth? And by basically exploiting Mars, which is ironic because he's talking all about Mars independence. Fuck him. It's just fuck him, and it's a shame that 8 people, 30 years ago had more balls and had more gusto, more moxie, more desire, more drive, more ethical imperative, if I want to use that phrase, than this guy who has all the ability and money and already has the spaceships to do it. What a damn shame, and that those people are some kind of laughing stock. Oh, media, rip Elon Musk to fucking shreds if you're going to do it to those 8 people, 30 years ago. This is outrageous.
Yeah, and it's really a shame. Their legacy should not die. Not like that.
No, they're far braver than this asshat. I mean, mind-boggling to me,
Yeah, that was truly an experiment that could have benefited everyone in some way. Yeah.
I mean, and if people want to say, but because I'm waiting for the emails to come in, questions@sovereigntech.com. I'm waiting for the emails. But those biospherians, they were a cult. They were this. Anybody, just go on Twitter, and I think you will see incredibly cultish aspects towards Elon Musk. He gets treated like Jesus Christ. And it's insane. There's so many people like, he's this great American. Blah, blah, blah. It's nonsense, anyway.
Yeah. I think one of the key aspects of a cult is, not just having a charismatic leader, but one that the followers follow.
Mhm.
You know, they do what he commands.
Yeah.
And like, of course, people were doing what John asked them to do, but they were also coming up with their own ideas and contributing.
Yes. Right. And yeah, like his idea, the space thing wasn't his idea. That was one of like his people, or I don't want to say his people, but yeah, but I mean, Elon Musk, I mean, if you won't join his cult, he's got a chip to go in your head to make sure you do, you know, like
I don't even get how Neuralink fits into this picture of going to Mars.
I mean, you know, if you're going to take 100 people a year, you might as well chip them as they walk through the door. What the hell? You know?
Maybe that's how the government's going to be run, is, you know, a supercomputer.
Yeah, you can choose any government you want. As long as the chip is all right with it. Fucking A. He is a walking dystopia. And people don't get it. Like, they don't see it. And it blows my mind that they don't see it. But whatever. Anyway, we could keep talking about that.
There are plenty of people that still think electric cars are a good idea.
He is a walking dystopia. Oh, man. Yeah. Yeah. So would you like to go into a biosphere?
It depends, I think. Biosphere 1 is Earth. And
yes, I love that.
I love Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it depends. What biosphere are you talking about? Are you asking about Biosphere 2 or Silent Running?
Biosphere Sovryn. I don't know, like just a little, I don't know. You want to go build a biosphere?
Just a little geodesic dome with some rabbits and a
There's
little
already
orchard.
some of those in New Hampshire anyway. I don't know. But boy, I don't want to go down there, those conversations. But
well, if it was me and you and some nice little animals.
Yeah.
Some berry bushes. Yeah, it'd be really nice.
Yeah. Maybe a little geodesic dome in space, like in Silent Running. We should talk about that.
Yeah.
When we come back with a little more Sovereign Tech. Woo! Hey, baby, I know. You are tired of Gmail. You have had enough. Well, I have a solution for you. What I want you to do is you go to Fastmail, okay? It's fastmail.sovereigntech.com. That's the URL you can use. You're going to get a discount with that. You are going to love this. This is email for email's sake. This company does nothing more. Just email, and they do it right. All the latest security technologies. You want to log into your account with your YubiKey? You can do that. Fastmail has your hookup. Very inexpensive plans. I want you to check it out. You go to fastmail.sovereigntech.com. That'll get you the hookup, and it's an honor to have them as a part of Sovereign Tech. Woo! Let's get back to the show.
The Golden Stallion doing whatever he wants to do. The Climax.
It is time for the Climax, where I get to talk about whatever I want to talk about. But of course, I'm not alone. I'm being joined by none other than the absolutely brilliant, and folks, if you didn't realize it by now, do you have ears to hear? But by the brilliant Ellen Sovryn. And, perhaps if you had eyes to see, something you should see is Silent Running. So we're going to talk about this movie that we recently watched. It actually just came out on Blu-ray. It was a re-release by Arrow Films. I'm sure it was on Blu-ray beforehand, but Arrow Films do these great, like 2K and 4K well, I might have an issue with 4K, but you can listen back to episodes of Sovereign Tech to find out about that, where I ripped that technology to shreds. Regardless, they do great 1080p, shall we say, restorations of, films that other people would ignore, but they do it, they produce them on limited scales. So it's viable for them to, to make money off of putting together these tremendous packages with lots of, audio commentaries and making specials and all this other stuff. They really, really do great work in the home video space, shall we say. And so I think it was November 17th, they released Silent Running. We've watched, actually, you and I, Ellen, we've watched a lot of their releases. In fact, I made you wait to watch The Last Starfighter, even though I already had it on Blu-ray. I wanted the Arrow Films came out with a new version earlier in 2020. And I said, oh, no. We're going to watch this as best as possible. And wow, did they do great work with The Last Starfighter. Let me ask you this before we get into Silent Running. a couple things. What did you think of The Last Starfighter? Out of 10, 10 being the greatest, 10 being...
Oh, you always ask me this.
Well...
10 being Cleopatra and 1 being The Room.
Whoa, careful. Someone's going to give you shit for that.
That's my scale.
Yeah, all right.
The Last Starfighter was really fun. And
yes.
I appreciated the space adventure for what it was.
Yeah.
I think I gave that an 8.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's worthy of an 8. Absolutely.
Yeah. It was so much fun.
Yeah, that's a movie, even though, it was revolutionary in its use of CGI. Not the first, but revolutionary in its use of CGI. Amazingly, as rough as that CGI may look today, I think the movie plays just as well today as it did back in 83.
I thought it was charming.
Yeah. I love it. I think there's so much great stuff in it. So I would at least match your 8 out of 10 for that one. But totally worth. I feel like it's just one of those must-see films because it is a genuinely revolutionary film. We would not have, if you like any movie today that has CGI, you wouldn't have it if it wasn't for The Last Starfighter. Or
yeah,
at least,
you said after that movie they didn't do CGI again for a few years, right?
It was a long time before. I mean, basically, you went between that and Jurassic Park. You had a span of like a decade where people really didn't take CGI seriously. And it's weird that nobody came running to the company that did the CGI for, I think it was Digital Productions or whatever, that did the CGI for Last Starfighter, because they should have been blown away. Most people don't know that company did back in like 78, they did a demo for George Lucas with X-Wings in CGI, and Dennis Muren, special effects genius that he was blown away when he saw it. And it was just wildly ahead of its time. No one's ever going to be able, like, I can't, as a model maker or whatever else, I can't, or he wasn't a model maker, but as a special effects guy, I can't do this. Only CGI can do that. It took forever for CGI to get taken seriously, but this movie really stands tall. Is like, they went all in on it, and took the shot, and it won. But, before then, models were order of the day, and the master of models, especially before Star Wars, was Douglas Trumbull. And Silent Running is people would argue it's an environmental film. In fact, if there was something to be called ecological entertainment, I think this would actually fit the bill. Maybe not Biosphere 2, but this would. But it was made by Douglas Trumbull. All the way around. He was involved with it. Obviously did a lot of work with special effects. This is the guy who made special effects look real in space in 2001: A Space Odyssey. So, he had all the reputation and skill that he needed. Underneath him was John Dykstra, was one of the pivotal guys who did get Star Wars on the screen in 77 as a special effects artist. He basically taught Dennis Muren a thing or two. So when this film, gets cleaned up and put into, whatever 1080p and everything, largely, I felt like the effects held up. It looked pretty good.
I thought the models looked so awesome.
Yeah.
You can kind of tell that they're models, but they're so cool.
Yeah, they look great.
Yeah.
In fact, the model for the Valley Forge, which is the main ship that the main character played by Bruce Dern, who the character's name is Freeman Lowell. Again, this movie is from 72. That model for that spaceship would actually get reused in the original Battlestar Galactica, because it was just such a great shot and such a great idea and design that they included it there. So this is I guess we'll get into, this is a movie that is all about trying to say the Earth has just been fucked.
There's basically no vegetation left on Earth.
Yeah. And if you read the novelization of it, you find out that it's 75 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, they say it's 75 degrees everywhere on Earth. And I thought that's Fahrenheit. They've got climate control across the entire thing. So it's perfect California weather every day.
Yeah.
But 75 degrees Celsius, that's close to boiling.
Yes. And so there's no plant life on Earth. And so it's been preserved in outer space by varying corporations, from Dow to Coca-Cola to, and they put it in your face that the corporations are behind everything, and not in a good way.
Yeah, and the model that we're talking about, the spaceship, the Valley Forge, it's got these giant geodesic domes of environments, but there's like 5 or 6 of them, and they're all attached to this central shaft, and that's the ship.
Right.
And that's, like, if you can envision that, then you can kind of imagine what the model looked like. Like, you can see into the domes and see whatever environment they've got inside there.
Yeah, so there's 4 guys, because there's multiple ships out in space with these domes on them. There's 4 guys who seem to be in charge of each ship, and then each ship has at least 3 drones, or what are basically droids, androids. Again, this is pre-Star Wars, folks. Keep that in mind. But I think George Lucas took a whole lot from this movie, because like the look of R2-D2 matches these drones. In fact, they each have a name, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. It matches them perfectly. And the amazing thing is, though, while George Lucas did use like Kenny Baker, he did use, little people to be inside of his droids, or, in the case of C-3PO, it's, Anthony Daniels. When you look at these drones, like the whole time you're watching the movie, you and I were watching the movie, we're like,
yeah, there's something weird about that.
Yeah,
there's
like,
very eerie. Like it looks pneumatic.
The way that they're moving.
Yeah, but then maybe it's also kind of slightly human, but you can't really, like, no human would fit into these.
No, right. They're
like,
small, like R2-D2,
right.
And they're bipedal. Whereas where R2-D2 is like kind of a tripod technically, and he can roll around. These don't have wheels. They're walking around, and you're like, wait, how is this possible? And in the whole, like half the movie, we're like, how did they do that? What is this effect?
And you finally looked it up, because I was like, I think it's pneumatics, maybe. And you're like, maybe. But you found out that they're actually amputees.
Yeah,
like
they're
people
amputees
who have no legs.
Right. And so they're walking around with their hands. And that's what they got. And they got like 4 or 5 of them to play these 3 roles.
And that's why it looks so eerie, because it is a human in there that's doing this movement.
It's an amazing effect, though.
Yes.
I don't know if they'd be allowed to do it today. I can't say why not, really. I mean, I think it's, because they, like, Doug Trumbull's a good guy. They, as soon as the movie ends, they tell you, they say, thanks, and starring the amputees. They list off all the amputees' names because they want you to know, like, they're really giving them a place of honor.
Sure.
So I thought they did it in a very respectful way, but it is an incredible visual effect. It just
really
blows your
is.
mind when you see it. Yeah. It's a real standout for the film are the drones. And I think they're meant to kind of be a standout.
And there's more that's interesting about those, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So basically, the overall story goes is that Freeman Lowell, he's like the only guy that seems to care about these plants, and he's taking care of them and everything.
He's the caretaker of the garden,
right?
Essentially.
Right. I don't want to rehash the whole movie because that'll take too much time, but just quickly, he's the caretaker of these forests and everything. And the order comes from Earth. Hey, guess what? We're giving up on this project. So just fucking nuke the forests. Like we don't need plants anymore.
Yeah. The companies aren't going to shell out
Right.
money to keep this project going.
And understand, these are the last plants of Earth anywhere on Earth or anywhere in the solar system. This is it.
But
And
they don't need them. They've got
but we don't need them.
synthetic
Just
food.
nuke them. Let's get back home. Yeah. And so he has, Freeman Lowell has these moments where he's making these ecological arguments and everything, and again, we're talking 1972, folks. Of course, it's taking
corny.
place in the future. Bruce Dern's acting. The funny thing with this movie is you don't know to like the guy. Like, he's supposed to be the hero, but he's kind of not. And I don't want to call him an anti-hero either.
He has to make some tough decisions.
Well, he starts, let's just say he starts killing people.
Well, they're blowing up the domes.
Yeah, right. And he's like, I'm not going to let you destroy these forests. And
He saves the last dome.
yes,
But
one final dome.
He has to, in order to save it, he has to murder one guy.
Right.
The others, actually, they also get murdered, but they get blown up with the rest of the domes.
Yeah.
But no, he like physically strangles one of the guys to save the forest.
Yeah. So I feel like this movie has an ecological message, and it ends basically with, we'll just say it. Freeman Lowell kills himself after everything that he did, but he launches the last dome into the stars, and he leaves one of the drones to take care of it for, I guess, into eternity, or, you know, for however long.
Right.
But he blows up the rest of the Valley Forge with him in it. And he, you know, I guess before he has to face a course martial or whatever.
Well, yeah, if he was captured, they would have found out everything.
Yeah, and
that
he'd have
done.
to atone for his sins, as it were. I mean, there's a lot going on in this film. I think it's a very deep film. I think there's a lot of commentary. Like, the other shipmates that are originally alive seem to need the others to do very minuscule things that, like, there's no reason they can't do too, but it's almost like a commentary that humanity has become lazy.
Very lazy, and
Right.
they don't care about anything. Like,
Right.
they've got a robot to set up their pool.
Yeah.
The billiard table.
And it's just this little round billiard table. It's not even a full-size billiard table that you have to walk around. It's very, very weird.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the things that Laurell says to them is,
Mhm.
like, this is the problem on Earth, is that nobody cares anymore.
Right. And so I don't, like, there's a lot of messages here, a lot of deep stuff in it. And I feel like it's kind of like Zardoz, where I feel like I need to watch it a couple more times to really, really grok what's being laid down. But I don't think it really wins. I don't think it really sticks the landing, I guess, at saying we need to save the trees, you know?
I don't
What do you
agree.
think? You think it hits it? You think it does
I think
the job?
it does. You know, you can say that the acting was rough, but I think it's just that beginning scene where he's telling off his shipmates that is like, maybe he's not the right guy to do this intense
Comes off
speech.
psychotic.
But, well, he is partially psychotic.
Sure.
But that's when it gets really good, is when you see him go kind of psycho and murder the guy.
Mhm.
Like, I actually, as much as I do not condone violence or murder in any way, I think that makes the movie so much more intense. Like, it takes it to the next level, because this guy is willing to murder to protect the forest. That's how much he loves what he's doing, and, like, how deeply seated that desire is to sustain life. And, like, I think the rest of the movie is really sweet. Like, he ends up taking care of the robots and treating them like his friends.
Right.
Yeah, there's some interesting commentary around that too. Like, they actually seem to have feelings.
Yeah. Like, they're sad when one of them dies. When one of
Right.
the other drones dies, like, they have feelings about it, which is kind of weird. There's no good guy in this movie that's a human anyway. I wonder if that's part of the underlying message that maybe Doug Trumbull was trying to tell, is that humans just flat out are the problem. And even the one that you think is, like, the best and that would take care of things actually ends up becoming complacent and is as much of a problem as his counterparts.
Well, he, in the end, did a very heroic thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that he used some tragic strategies to achieve it.
Yeah, I mean, he did save the forest. He saved the trees. That's for sure.
Yeah, he ensured that they would be sustained forever.
Yeah. I mean, this is not a feel-good movie.
Yeah, no.
By no means. Total antithesis to Last Starfighter. In fact, I think I said to you, okay, we're going to watch Last Starfighter tonight because I just got to get the taste out of my mouth of silent running, you know?
I don't know. I feel like you interpreted this movie very differently than I did. Like, I didn't see it as, like, yes, it was a dystopian film. It was meant to be a cautionary tale, but I thought it was great. You know, there were some moments in it that were really beautiful, and I think that's what made me like it, was that humans do have this capacity to really care for the life which sustains them.
I mean, I like the movie. I like the movie a lot for a bunch of reasons. I mean, even the simplest reason that it's a serious science fiction film tackling serious subjects pre-1977, which you don't, I mean, you have some, you know, but, like, you have Silent Running, Logan's Run. I mean, you know, Planet of the Apes.
Soylent Green?
Well, there is Soylent. I mean, well, the work of Chuck Heston stands on its own, but greatest actor ever. But I like it a lot. I'm just saying that I mean, it's a film that is trying to say a lot. I don't think you can really get it in one watch, But then, admittedly, I also don't know if it's compelling enough to, like Zardoz, it's compelling enough to watch again because it's so damned weird. As to where this isn't weird, and it's not meant to be weird because I think Doug Trumbull wanted you to relate to everything that's going on. He wants you to see the Coca-Cola signs. He wants you to see like the stupid pool table. He wants you to see all this stuff. I don't know if it's compelling enough to watch over and over again to pick up everything that Doug was putting down.
Why not? I feel like it is. I think there's some really genuinely beautiful things. I mean, like, even when it's close to the end of the movie, he is racing towards the garden in this quad type vehicle.
Yeah.
And he hits, I don't know if it was Huey or Dewey or Louie. But anyway, he damages him and he has to perform surgery.
Right.
And the other drone is there in the room with him. And it's really touching. Like, they care about each other so much. And I just think that, like, this movie is really putting on showcase, like, how one person who cares can really do all of these good things, even in tragic circumstances. And maybe there are parts that are kind of slow, but still, you get what's going on in the movie, like, in the larger context. Like, he's flying around Saturn and going through Saturn's rings and hoping that the ship gets lost so that he doesn't get caught by whoever search party is out looking for him.
Yeah.
And he's really planning on living there for the rest of his life and taking care of these drones and the forest.
Yeah, but when it happens, he starts eating the shitty food instead of the fruit of the trees. He forgets because, like, the forest starts dying, and it's because he stopped tending it,
Well, no, it started dying because he was moving farther away from the sun.
Yes, but he didn't even, like, notice that it happened.
Right. But part of that, I think, is commenting on this phenomena that I think a lot of sci-fi authors postulated would happen to humans when they go out into space by themselves for long periods of time. And that is, like, going space happy.
Yeah.
Essentially, like, losing your mind, being completely lonely and depressed because you're out in space alone. And that's kind of why he turns to these drones for friendship. He, like, teaches them to play cards with him.
Yeah.
But he does wake up to what he's been doing. So I think that's just a period of transition for him.
Yeah, I guess I could see where there's an opening. Not that there's ever going to be a Silent Running 2. Actually, I shouldn't say that. Hollywood seems to be willing to make any fucking sequel today, so maybe there would be.
But it wouldn't have the same, like, environmental message. There wouldn't be the same, like, really sweet core of humanity there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, like, I'm compelled to read the novel because that was written after, like, kind of after the fact. And I'm like, I know there's a lot being said in that movie. I can see it that, like, no, that meant something. That means something. And it is a very smart film. And I could see where, frankly, there could be a sequel to where, okay, humanity might have grown up and good thing they found Huey with that forest just floating out in the solar system. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe they were able to catch up to it and bring it back.
Yeah, maybe something like that. And I don't need a happy ending. That's fine. Like, I'm okay with it not having necessarily a happy ending.
Yeah, even if, like, the quote-unquote hero of the story blows himself up.
Yeah. I guess I just feel like there... I don't want to say there's something missing from it because I love Doug Trumbull's work. Yeah, I don't know. What do you give? Well, all right, wait, before we go to rankings. I can really see where this movie was inspirational to the Biospherians with Biosphere 2. Like, I totally get it. Like, I think they use this as a roadmap, in a very real way. And with that in mind, clearly it's an inspiring film like you were talking about. Like, obviously you're not the only one that picked it up like that because they did. They even mention it in the documentary, which I thought was, again, some funny synchronicity because we had just watched that movie like the week previous.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. But we'll move on from that.
Can I ask
please.
you a question?
Yeah, please.
do you feel like there's something missing in this movie because there is no sex?
Well, I'll tell you, I'd like the movie. And look, the movie doesn't have to be what I want it to be, for it to be great. I would have liked it if it ended off as kind of an Adam and Eve story, and so that way that there could have been, like a female character on board, and her and Freeman, could float out in space forever in their little forest. I wouldn't have minded that, but no, it's okay that it doesn't have sex. 2001 doesn't have sex either. And I think that, the movie's great. Nor does 2010. And I think actually that movie's not just great. That movie's fucking amazing.
So what is it missing that you feel like it would have been better if it had included?
I just feel like some of its messages, like it needs to be a little more surface level. Like there needed to be a little bit of a stronger statement. And I think the movie looks so good that people would have went for it if Doug made the stronger statement. I think he's making it. You just can't see it right away. And even I'm still trying to figure it out. So that's what's going on for me with it. The other negative for this film that dates it, even though it's kind of cute, the music. So
yeah, that's interesting too.
Yeah. I think it was Peter Schickel who did the symphony, but then out of nowhere, Joan Boaz is singing, and that just firmly plants it in hippie territory, like this is space hippies, like just straight up as soon as she starts singing. And I don't say that derogatorily, like at all. I'm just saying not the space hippie part, but it throws the movie out, it doesn't throw it out. It throws it off. Like it suddenly, it's so it's so anachronistic to the rest of the film. What
I suppose so. I mean, not that I really know who Joan Boaz is or any of her other work, but I do know that in this movie, there's a lot of like gray steel and spaceship kind of environment. There's really no feminine presence. And then suddenly there's this woman singing with a beautiful voice about gathering your children by your side. Yeah. And that does seem a little out of place. Like that's what would happen in a sort of Eden setting. But that's not exactly what's going on in the movie.
Yeah, but I do think that was a very conscious choice to use her. And I might be saying her name wrong. I mean, I've heard people talk about her. I've read her name a million times. I know what she's about. I've heard her music before, even if I've never exactly heard her name. But I mean, she was a superstar at this time. I think that there is a message in that decision of using not just like a hippie singer, but using a female singer and having that be the only female presence in the whole film is that ethereal singing voice. There's some kind of message there. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but there's some kind of message there. But it still, I feel like it throws the movie way off. Like it feels completely out of place, in the film.
Yeah. It's almost like that's what, he's trying to preserve, at least
that spirit.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Even though it's not there, that's like what the ultimate goal is.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, I think it's like the opening is super clever. The opening credits, it looks like you're on Earth and you're just seeing all this plant life and animal life and everything. And then, oh no, we're on a space station, or, we're in a spaceship. What happened? I mean, that's a brilliant opening to do that, and brilliant design, because I mean, there's never a point in the film where you don't believe that what you're seeing would work. Like that what you're seeing makes sense. Like the dome, all the design about it just seems to really flow and make sense. So I give it a lot of credit there. But again, there's just those little things that come in where it just doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't click.
I mean, there are a few things like, what's the power source? How is this able to keep going forever? The lights that he sets up in the
sunlights,
forest. Yeah. But they don't really address it, and it's better that they don't try to give a half-assed explanation. They just leave it to your imagination, and that's fine.
Yeah,
that's acceptable. I mean, it didn't make me believe it any less.
Yeah. I mean, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you thought was like a powerful message or powerful point in the film? Anything to do with the drones? Anything?
I mean, we touched on it all. I don't want to go into it too much deeper, like you said, because it would take up a lot more time.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think we kind of touched on all the major points.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, there's something to do like the relationship between man and machine and nature. That's in there too. Again, there's a lot of interesting. I know there's great ideas being laid out in here.
Yeah, I think after we watched this movie, I said to you, like, nature makes man. Man makes machine. Machines take man to space. Man dies. Machine takes care of nature.
Yeah,
It's like evolution has gone full circle, and now machines are taking care of nature.
Yeah, I don't know if like Doug Trumbull was crazy about that poem, All Watched Over by Machines of Loving Grace. Like, I don't know if like he was somehow commenting on that. I know there's something there. And so I really like it because I recognize how bold the film is, even though it just needs more, I need to give it more is what I'm saying. Not that it needs to have more, but it was not a really successful film. I mean, Doug Trumbull basically after he made it would go back to doing special effects up until I think it was like Brainstorm or something, or that he made in the 80s. And he'd do a great job with special effects and would make some pretty amazing films as far as that goes. But I mean, so what do you give this? What do you give this film out of 10?
I really like this film.
Yeah.
And a lot of the critiques that you have about it, I think I would give it an 8.
You overlook them and you give it an 8.
It's not that I overlook them. I've addressed them. I disagree.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Fair.
I feel very differently about it than you do.
Okay. No, that's fair. That's fair.
No, I really like it. I mean, to me, it's high up there because it's hard science fiction.
Yep.
And even though it's dystopia, it still puts on display like some really integral parts of nature and humanity that I just love it.
Okay. 8 out of 10 from Ellen. I'm going to give it a 7, but I'll tell you, I'll option it. I've never done this before. I'll option it for like a 9 because
option it. What does that mean?
Because I think that there's the chance that like especially after I read the book or whatever, once I get what it's trying to say, because I can just smell it, that there's stuff there happening underneath. Once I get that, I could see myself like just really being like really passionate about this film.
Yeah. Like if there was this underlying message of like nature overall as an intelligence will find a way to take care of itself and ensure its survival even beyond man. Like, I think that would be a really powerful message.
Yeah. Like if there's some kind of, I could pick some idea that, like the universe is like, or the galaxy is like biosphere 0. And
but like if nature formed a greater intelligence, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like overall, these many individual beings form a greater being that knows how it can, in the long term, ensure its survival. Like
something
that would
like
be
that.
so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe if there's a few tardigrades on there.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, so that's what I've got. I'm going to give it a 7, but I'm open to it actually being a lot better once I get it, once I get more of it, understand what it's trying to say. So there we go. Okay. So, I want to end this off. We need to wrap this up. We're going 2.5 hours, which is not unheard of when you're on the show, Ellen, because we have so much to talk about. Can you imagine what it's like living with us? Holy shit.
Gosh, we're like constantly engaged with each other.
I mean, the level of the ideas. No, anyway. Yeah. So we finished watching Babylon 5.
We did.
Now I don't want to necessarily get into a whole ton of spoiler territory. We don't have to spend a whole ton of time on this.
Time is an infinite circle.
Big stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Well, did I oversell Babylon 5? Like, did I put it on too high a pedestal, in your opinion?
The way that you're looking at me when you ask this question is like you already know what I'm going to say. I bawled like a baby.
In the last episode?
In the last episode.
Yeah.
And you told me I would.
Yeah.
So, no, I don't think you oversold.
Woo!
I think you were absolutely right. Where I said with hesitancy and almost regret that it is the best show ever made previously when I was on Sovryn Tech.
Yeah.
I cannot deny, I have to say with absolute certainty, it is the greatest show ever made.
Thank you.
You had to watch all of it in order for the ending to be so powerful.
Yeah.
But God, I cried so much. I pulled the box of tissues over.
Yeah. And I've seen that ending so many times. I still cry. I cannot help it. I listened to the commentary track on the DVD. This is why it's beautiful to have discs. I listened to the commentary track, and Straczynski is choking up while he made the fucking thing, and he's choking up, especially during that last episode. But to get that kind of feeling, you have to go on a 5-year journey, but you've got to go on that journey. And unfortunately, people, especially today, are just too goddamn impatient, and they're not willing to go through perhaps, would you say there's any aspect of it that was boring? Of the whole series?
No. I mean, there are some episodes that are kind of outliers that don't play into the larger storyline, but I think like the vast majority of them do. And even for those episodes, there's still so many compelling characters and interesting things that happen. And it's so imaginative and so beautiful and smart. And I mean, it's like if all of the exciting and interesting and dramatic moments in life were condensed.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the show is. Yeah. Except it's on a galactic scale.
Right. But you've got to, you have to spend 5 years with these characters to get that amazing climax.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, it's so hard to even comprehend it because it's like, the ending of this era and a new one is beginning, but it's like so hard to move on.
Yeah.
Because things that happened are just so incredible.
Yeah. I mean, we watched Crusade. We watched everything. And Crusade could have gone places, huh? I mean, would you like to see the show continue?
I guess, yeah. It could have gone places.
Yeah.
I never really liked it. I mean, not as much as Babylon 5.
Yeah, I mean, it only had like 11 episodes.
If it wasn't tied in with that series, I probably wouldn't be interested in it that much.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, but we did watch the movies Lost Tales. Didn't you think I thought that was dynamite, Lost Tales.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, like those little stories and like talk about dealing with explanations about things in Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought that was great. And I mean, like, that's the thing, but you have to spend the time with the characters, like even Legend of the Rangers, which was kind of hokey, especially that scene when she's shooting the ship's weapons from within a 3D. Like, what the fuck was that?
That was probably the worst scene from a movie I've ever seen because they were trying so hard to make it look awesome and badass.
She gave it everything she could.
And it was too much.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah. It just looked clownish.
Would you say that's the worst moment in Babylon 5 history?
Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, if not the worst, then it's very close to the worst.
Yeah. But at the same time, so as ridiculous as that little, and you got to watch Legend of the Rangers to understand, it's stupid. The movie overall is okay, but like that scene is really stupid.
I mean, they could have made that concept cool. Like,
there's a way. Yeah.
When you're inside this like floating chamber and your movements correspond to
you're doing these karate
the
moves and it's firing lasers.
Right.
Yeah. But my point in bringing up Legend of the Rangers is even that, as kind of ridiculous as some of that is, because you spent so much time with the characters, when Zecharia shows up, did you like stop breathing for a second?
Well, you feel like the gravity has just been turned up.
Yes, exactly. I mean, like as soon as you see Zecharia, you're just like, You know, like
you deeply inhale.
Yes.
You're just waiting on the edge of your seat to see what happens next. Because
exactly.
everything that comes out of his mouth is like holy.
Right. See, what other show are you going to get where that happens? I mean, like, that's mind-boggling for that to occur in something, you know? I mean, Luke Skywalker doesn't even have that kind of cachet, and it's been burned up anyway by Ryan Johnson. You know, it's incredible. And I'm glad. I'm so glad that I feel vindicated. And it was one of the grandest pleasures I've ever experienced in my life to share this with you.
Thank you.
In fact, I've only had one other person in my life, and it was my friend in high school that I got to share that experience of going through Babylon 5 with. So you are one of two people. It's basically Spock and you. And that was his nickname in high school. Anyway, and it was awesome to go through it with you. And especially,
You're still hanging out with Vulcans all this time.
Yeah. Whoa, Talana. Sorry. So yeah, it was amazing. Like, and it is an experience, folks. Would you say the same?
Yes, absolutely. An emotional roller coaster. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, most people will watch a TV series and say, oh, it's an emotional roller coaster. But I'm not most people, and I don't watch most. I mean, I've seen television series, but the attachment that I formed to these characters, it was so real. Yeah. Like, I was defending Delenn like she was my mother.
Yes.
Like when Captain Lockley came in, I was like, no, she's disagreeing with Delenn. She needs to go.
Yeah.
These people, I mean, the characters, not all of them are human, but they are so beautiful, and you can't help but love them.
Yeah. Sheridan's awesome.
Yeah. Man. I mean, even like Londo, he has his flaws, but you like him.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though we don't want to give too much away, but yeah, you still like him. Bottom line. Yeah. Amazing. There's just, and we have many shows and movies left to watch, but I can guarantee you, and I'm sure a year from now, 2 years from now, you'll probably say the same. Nothing matches that. I mean, just nothing comes close.
Just the depth of emotional exploration that they go through in the show is unmatched.
Yeah. So there you go, folks. The greatest show in television history.
Yes.
I wanted to get that report in. I know we're going long, but I wanted to get the report in that, yes, Brian Sovryn's not insane. This thing Babylon 5 is amazing. And just to hear your passion was wonderful. I mean, I don't need to be proven right. I just love getting to hear someone else, talk about something, art so passionally.
It was so great to share it with you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
it was
love.
really beautiful to watch together.
Yeah, it was. So, there you go. Greatest show ever made. And you got a couple other things to check out that we mentioned throughout the episode. Hell, there's a lot of things you get to walk away from this episode, and all kind of interrelated. Yeah. Silent Running and Spaceship Earth, and even the books that we talked about earlier. I mean, they all kind of fit together and create a certain picture, or at least some possibilities.
Imagine what our life is like.
Yeah. What an amazing life. Let's just put it that way. Anyway, I think we have some other things to get to in our life. And I say it with a smile. So
I think we've enriched people's lives enough for one night.
Fair enough. So we will wrap this one up. More Sovryn Tech to come, of course, and so much more in the Sovryn Tech feed. I'm honored that so many people enjoy all of these special episodes that I put out as well. Go to sovryntech.com to get more. And actually, there's I did a whole write-up on, if you want to go watch Babylon 5, I did a whole write-up there on what order to watch the entire show, all the movies, everything. So I did the homework for you, and it's the same order that Ellen and I watched it.
Yeah, we watched it in that order.
Yeah, exactly. So go, you can check that out there if you don't know where to start. Golden Stallion's got your hookup. So we will end this episode, Ellen. As always, an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me on. I loved it.
Yeah. And, anyway, we'll be back with more Sovryn Tech soon. We'll see all of you on the other side.
Thank you for listening to Sovryn Tech, an Osiris One production. Now go out there and make some trouble.
No zoonoids were harmed in the making of this podcast.